Chapter 1208. After losing his weapon, Gorfus's battle power dropped by more than 30%. No matter how fast he moved his short legs and ran like a rabbit, he could not catch up to Grimm's elusive figure. Every spell that was infused with flame penetration caused a heart-wrenching pain, and the damage to Gorfus increased exponentially. After all, Gorfus was a master of melee. If he did not have a way to get close to the spellcaster, he would definitely be killed by the spellcaster like a dog. If he did not lose his warhammer, Gorfus would still have a mid-range attack. Now that the warhammer was gone, all he had left was an obvious area of effect attack, the Berserk Roar. Trying to use the Berserk Roar to stop his opponent and then kill him was an insult to his opponent's intelligence. Thus, Gorfus, who was at a loss, could only chase after the flame giant like a clumsy bear, enduring his opponent's endless flame attacks. There was no longer any suspense in the outcome of the battle. The only thing that kept the ogre chief from falling was the two powerful allies that were about to arrive. As long as Fenson and Cratch arrived, it would be easy for the three of them to take down this human magus with their combined strength. At the very least, they would be able to scare Gorfus away and preserve the Angarash ogre camp that had lasted for thousands of years. It was this belief that allowed the ogre chief to persevere under the ferocious attacks of the fire wizard spells, unwilling to fall even after so long. Compared to Golfus, Grimm, who was fighting Golfus, was having a hard time as well. He was very careful. On one hand, he had to be very careful to avoid being tricked by the ogre chief again. On the other hand, he had to control the power of his attacks to prevent them from exceeding the ogre chief's endurance range and falling before his reinforcements arrived. There was no longer any suspense in this battle. However, a victory, even if it meant killing a grade 4 creature, would not help Grimm achieve his true goal. Thus, Gorfus's actions would only be meaningful if his main goal was achieved. Thus, Gorfus could not fall yet. At the very least, he could not fall before he attracted his two allies. It was a huge and clear lake. The azure water was calm and tranquil. In the dark and deep wetland swamp, it was as beautiful and clear as a huge sapphire. Moat, the sage of the swamp, stood quietly on a muddy bank at the edge of the lake. He used the wooden staff in his hand to draw a simple pattern on the ground. When everything was done, it stood in the middle of the magic circle with a wooden staff in its hand. It held a wooden bowl half filled with water and began to chant an ancient and mysterious magic spell. The low and hoarse incantation echoed across the clear lake. Although there was no wind, it set off small ripples one after another in the place it passed. When the magic spell lasted for half an hour and gradually became louder, the originally calm lake began to boil like boiling water. When Moat, the sage of the swamp, reached the latter half of his summoning incantation, a thick mist began to rise from the surface of the lake. The mist did not disperse. Instead, it gathered together and gradually formed a giant waterman that was about 12 meters tall. When Moat finished the last line of the incantation, the wooden bowl in his hand exploded. The water turned into mist and entered the waterman's body. The giant waterman opened its eyes at the same time. Lorenz, the water prophet, grade 4. The summoning ceremony took a full 15 minutes before water prophet Lorenz fully recovered his senses. It lowered its head and stared at Moat, who looked like a child in front of it. It asked in a deep and old voice, "Moat, why did you disturb my sleep this time? I feel like I've only been asleep for 300 years this time. If you can't give me a good enough reason, I'll take the water soul from you and completely cut off our spiritual connection." Merging his body into a natural water source and slowly growing his strength through thousands of years of sleep was actually one of Lorenz's methods of growth. However, it was obvious that in a material plane, such a method of growth was easily affected by external factors. Hence, although he and Moat had known each other for over 1,000 years, he was still in a bad mood after being suddenly awakened from his deep sleep. "Old friend, many things have happened in the wetland swamp while you were asleep. Since you're awake, why don't you use your strength to sense it? The wetlands need you. We need you. You can't continue sleeping." Moat shook his head bitterly, a helpless expression on his face. Wetlands. Lorenz was stunned for a moment. He then closed his eyes and carefully sensed his surroundings. As expected of a grade 4 water prophet, even if he was thousands of miles away, as long as there was a source of water, nothing could escape his spiritual senses. After closing his eyes and sensing for a moment, Lorenz suddenly opened his eyes. His gentle gaze was filled with a red glow of anger. Why? Why is there so little life in the wetlands? Why are the water elementals of the wetlands crying? What happened in the wetland swamp during the 300 years that I was asleep? Moat raised his head, and his gaze collided with Lorenz's. The two spiritual threads, one blue and one green, connected, and they understood everything that had happened in the wetlands over the past few centuries. Mosepore, blight, human magi, battle of the wetlands. Lorenz's gaze gradually turned fierce. It looks like the source of all disasters is the Mosepore tribe. After this, it's time to chase these fellows out of the wetlands. But what's with that human magus? Why do I sense an even more terrifying and dangerous aura from him? At the mention of the human magus, Moat's expression turned awkward. He's a fire magus. Water prophet Lorenz's originally calm state of mind instantly exploded. What? Moat, you're crazy. How can you let a grade 4 fire magus run amok in our wetlands? He'll cause so much damage to our environment. No, I have to chase him out immediately. Water and fire were incompatible furnaces. Even though they had never met, Water prophet Lorenz did not have a good impression of the human fire magus. Even if Grimm had Alice's blessing of fate, he would still have to bear the negative effect of Lorenz's favorability. On the contrary, Grimm and Moat, the sage of the swamp, had done a few things to Lorenz's liking, so the relationship between them was barely at a friendly level. Otherwise, Moat would not have immediately mobilized the higher-ups on his side to rescue Grimm after receiving his long-distance communication. Of course, one of the main reasons Grimm was able to invite Moat was that his actions were in line with the overall interests of the wetlands. With the same interests, with an additional grade 4 helper like Grimm, the wetlands had a higher chance of expelling the Mosepore tribe. Unfortunately, the water prophet Lorenz that Moat had specially invited did not seem to be on good terms with that human magus. Therefore, as the mediator, Moat also felt a little awkward and a headache. Old friend, please bear with it for now. That human magus is only here for the Mosepore tribe's water of life, and has no conflict of interest with us. So, all right, seeing that he did not break our rules after entering the swamp, I won't look for trouble with him for now. Water of life? The wetland's water source has been severely damaged. It's very likely that the Mosepore tribe extracted the water of life from it. We can't let that human magus take it away. When the time comes, we can just use some other treasures to send him away. Moat did not express his opinion on the water prophet's suggestion, and instead sighed worriedly. Lorenz had never interacted with that fire magus before, so he naturally did not understand his strength. If they really did as Lorenz said and wanted to send the human magi away, the wetland swamp would soon face another terrifying disaster. However, Moat knew that his companion was stubborn, and arguing with him now would not help the situation. Hence, he could only sigh and silently think of various ways to salvage the situation. No matter what, that fire magus is fighting with the Ongros ogre chieftain Gorfus. Logically speaking, we should rush over to support him. So, old friend, we can only rely on your misteleportation this time. No problem. I'll still help you with this. Old friend, come over here. Under water prophet Lorenz's request, Moat walked down the muddy shore and stepped on the water's surface as if it was flat ground, arriving at Lorenz's feet. Old friend, relax. We're going to teleport away now. Amidst Lorenz's loud and clear cheers, the two figures, one tall and one short, sank into the water and disappeared without a trace. In another corner of the lake, 100 miles away, mist pervaded the air, and two strange figures suddenly appeared. This is the southwest corner of Darkpool Lake. Old friend, give me 2 minutes to prepare, and we'll be able to use the next mist teleportation. Based on my estimations, we'll be able to reach the vicinity of the ogre camps after teleporting 11 times. Thank you for your hard work. It's nothing, it's all for the wetlands. Chapter 1209. This was the depths of a dark and deep mushroom jungle. The towering mushrooms propped up a huge canopy, blocking the gloomy sky, making the light in the forest even darker and darker. The luminous mushrooms and glimmering moss all over the jungle lit up with colorful fluorescent light. Coupled with the fluorescent spores fluttering in the sky, the mushroom jungle was filled with a strange and evil feeling that only existed in fairy tales. Looking into the distance through this lush mushroom forest, one could see some strange spore plants growing in a large expanse of open valley. The rhizomes of these plants were very thick, and the fruits that grew on them were even bigger, completely disproportionate to their petite bodies. Because the fruits on the stems were too large, with a diameter of several meters, the stems of these plants were bent. In the spore field, a spore man that was no more than a meter tall was working hard. They plowed the soil from time to time, watered some green juice, and carefully took care of every plant with huge fruits, as if they were taking care of their own children. Every time a fruit ripened, the huge fruit ball would burst open, and a thick and viscous fruit juice would flow out from inside. And along with the fruit juice, there would be a strange fetus squeaking with its eyes closed. At this time, the spore people who were responsible for taking care of the spore forest would gather in groups. They carefully wrapped the fetus and sent it back to the village to be raised. And with the arrival of the spore forest maturation period, one after another magic spore babies were born, which made the nursery staff extremely busy, and there was no time to rest at all. And in the periphery of the spore forest, one could see a tall fungus giant constantly patrolling. On the shoulder of each fungus giant, there was an even more petite spore person. The spore person's hands and feet were inserted into the fungus giant's body as if they had melted, as if they had become one with the fungus giant. Because of this strange ability of the magic spore clan, it allowed them to occupy a place in the wetland swamp where monsters ran rampant with their weak body and strength, and slowly infect this territory with a method of spore implantation. The magic spore clan was not monolithic, but divided into two major classes, nobles and civilians. The so-called magic spores actually referred to the noble class. They generally had all kinds of strange magic abilities. After infecting the swamp creatures, they could also obtain some magic abilities. Ordinary civilians, on the other hand, did not have this kind of ability, so they were generally engaged in hard and tiring work such as nursery workers, plantation workers, and peripheral sentries. Amelia waited anxiously in the mushroom forest until a sneaky, skinny figure appeared in front of her. "Uncle Neru, how's the situation in the Holy Land?" Amelia asked anxiously. "Ferentsen has already left. I heard that something happened at the ogre camp, so he rushed over to deal with it. Currently, Theo is the only one guarding the Holy Land, but he has an army of giants with him. It will be very difficult for you to sneak in." The one called Neru was an old male spore man looking at his appearance. He seemed to be nearing the end of his life. He was gasping for air, even when he spoke a few words. "What about the secret passage? Does the secret passage that my father secretly dug still exist?" "The secret passage is still there. However, the matter of you using the secret passage to escape last time has aroused Ferentsen's suspicion. He has been looking for the secret passage. For this, he has set up many mechanisms and traps in the Holy Land, many of which even I can't detect. Uncle Neru, it's been hard on you. You have always been the most loyal person to our family. You have also watched me grow up. If things go smoothly this time, you will leave with me. Princess, have you already decided to give up the ancestral property of the Magic Spore clan?" Amelia sighed faintly. "Neru, you have never walked out of this swamp, so you have no idea how vast and huge this world is. I am now a sorcerer, and the sorcerer world is a more glorious civilization than the spirit realm. The so-called business that our Magic Spore clan has been operating for hundreds of years seems like a ridiculous farce to me now. Once we leave this closed and conservative world, Our most poor clan will definitely develop and grow stronger, faster. By the way, Uncle Neru, I asked you to secretly rope in some old clansmen who are willing to follow me. How is it going? Your Highness, you have been away for far too long. Many of the old clansmen have passed away one after another. To be on the safe side, I dare not probe recklessly, so I only roped in 7 of the most trustworthy fellows. Hearing Neru's answer, Amelia's eyes lit up. Enough, this is enough. According to the plan, I will sneak into the Holy Land to retrieve the things that originally belonged to my father. You and the clansmen you roped in prepare more seeds. All kinds of seeds will do. Take them all away. Remember, when you see the Holy Land ignite, bring your clansmen back here. At that time, I will bring all of you back to that new world. After giving some simple instructions, Amelia sent Naru away. Raising her head to look at the dark sky, she sensed the message from her master from afar. Only then did Amelia put on her hood again and quietly slipped into the Holy Land in the distance. The Magic Spore Clan's Holy Land was located in a huge, winding cave. If one entered from the front, there would be a sentry every 3 steps and a sentry every 5 steps. Along the way, one would encounter countless guards and sentries. Therefore, even with the magical power of the swamp sage, Moat, he could not extend his senses and eyes to this place. Naturally, it was impossible for him to know what the Mospoor clan was up to in the dark. However, the builder of this holy land was not Fawn's son, but Amelia's father, the previous leader of the Magic Spore clan. Therefore, Fawn's son, who had usurped the throne and power, naturally did not know that there was a hidden passage that led to the outside world in the heavily guarded Magic Spore Holy Land. The battle on the battlefield was still very intense. Gorfus, who had lost his warhammer, was like a clumsy bear. He chased after the tall flame giant tiredly, but he could not get close. Grimm's fire witchcraft brought an unimaginable disaster to Gorfus and the entire ogre camp. The ogres clearly had the advantage in numbers and terrain, but on the battlefield, it was Grimm who was beating up the entire Ankrosh ogre army. Just as Grimm was dominating the battlefield, the first batch of reinforcements hurried over. It was none other than the swamp sage, Moat, and the water prophet, Lorenz, who had rushed over using the water mist teleportation. Although they did not bring any reinforcements, with their grade 4 status, they were able to suppress the ogres in an instant. The despairing Gorfus covered his head and fled into the camp, not daring to fight anymore. He allowed the flame giant that Grimm had transformed into to reap the lives of his tribesmen. Grimm waved his hand, and the flame creatures that swarmed out chased after the fleeing ogres into the camp. In an instant, flames were ignited everywhere, and the sounds of killing could be heard everywhere. Seeing that the ogres no longer had the strength to retaliate, the water prophet, Lorenz, slowly stepped onto the battlefield and faced Grimm from afar. The Ankrosh ogres have lost the courage to fight back. Outsiders, you can stop now, Lorenz said calmly, his face made of light blue water, elemental mana, expressionless. We will take over the next battle. You must stop killing immediately. This water, elemental, isn't on our side? Grimm was confused by Lorenz's hostility, and he could not help but look at Moat suspiciously. Moat laughed bitterly and took out a small woven bag from his robes, tossing it to Grimm. This is the reward you deserve for your previous mission. As for the battle here, you should take it easy for now. Our target today is Fernson and this Gorfus. Let's try to convince him to surrender. Convince him to surrender? Grimm laughed coldly. We haven't even caught the ogre chief, and you're already thinking of convincing him to surrender. If we don't take this opportunity to destroy the entire ogre camp, it will be too late when their reinforcements arrive. Human Magus, mind your status. Lorenz did not know why, but he did not have a good impression of Grimm the moment they met. How we deal with this ogre chief is an internal matter of the wetland swamp. It's not up to an outsider like you to tell us what to do. Hearing Lorenz's reply, the expression on Grimm's face froze. He stared coldly at the water prophet and finally nodded. Good. Very good. Since this is an internal matter of the wetland swamp, I'll take a break." With that, Grim waved his hand, and his staff flew over from the side of the flame gate. Without the support of the magic wand's flame power, the flaming gate began to collapse inwardly along with a series of rumbling noises. Finally, it collapsed into a sea of fire. The fiery creatures that were still fighting on the battlefield also quickly dissipated, soon disappearing without a trace. In that moment, only the 12 swamp giants were left on the battlefield, still chasing after the fleeing ogres. The rest of the area was strangely deserted. The water prophet Lorenz did not care about Grim's performance. He stood in the middle of a boiling pond, and with a series of rapid chants, water figures quickly rose from the surface of the water, summoning a huge army of water elementals in an instant. These water elementals were mostly grade 1 or 2, but their numbers were shocking. Chapter 12:10. No matter how intelligent he was used to being a tiger in the sect. Sometimes, he would behave like an idiot in order to lure Fainson out of the sacred place of the Mospor clan. Even though Grim was already aware that he was being used as a tool, the other party's action of burning the bridge before crossing the river almost made him laugh in anger. As an elemental creature, Grim had already experienced the stubbornness and depression of it all. Therefore, when the water prophet started looking for trouble as soon as he appeared, Grim took advantage of the situation and hid to the side, silently observing the other party's methods. However, although this water prophet's brain wasn't very good, his martial arts were really strong. Putting everything else aside, the number of water elemental armies that came out from his elemental summoning alone made Grim's brows twitch uncontrollably. The fire creatures that Grim had summoned previously were at most 400 to 500 at most. However, with the existence of the Flame Gate, new fire creatures could continuously pour out from it, creating an effect of endless fire creatures on the battlefield. However, the water prophet was really generous. With a wave of his hand, he directly summoned a large black mass of water elementals. There were roughly 1,000 to 2,000 of them. Even though such an army of water elementals was not high in rank and only knew how to use simple water arrows, it was still a very impressive force when they were gathered together. Of course, such a force was nothing in Grim's eyes. However, it was quite terrifying to use it against the ogres who only had brute force and did not have any long-range attack skills. Although there was a certain proportion of shamans in the ogre camp who could cast some simple spells, their numbers were too few. When faced with this group of water elemental army that could kill gods in their way, they could only cover their heads and flee like rats. They did not even have the chance to fight back. Under Grim's observation, the sound of water arrows piercing through the air could be heard everywhere in the huge camp. What followed was the agonized wails of the Ankrosh ogres before their deaths. The Ankros ogres had thick skin and flesh. They could even withstand the water arrows of 7 to 8 water elementals and smash them into a puddle of water. He could carry 7 or 8 of them, but carrying 17 or 18 of them would be too much. The ogre warriors and barbarian soldiers roared furiously, raising their wooden shields and stone hammers to protect their heads and other vital areas. They roared as they charged at the water elementals that had gathered not far away. Swoosh, 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 swoosh. Concentrated water arrows rained down on the wooden shields, stone hammers, and their bodies. Amidst the dense water arrows, there were also the slow spell and water swamp spell cast by high-level water elementals. The ogres roared in anger and their eyes turned red, but their feet seemed to be glued to the ground, and their charging speed was as fast as a tortoise's. The attack method of the water elemental army was as simple as that: dense water arrows and the slow spell, but the attack effect was shockingly high, terrifyingly high. Their attacks did not seem as explosive or as intense as the fiery creatures, but the unlucky Ankarash ogres could only swallow their grievances under the barrage of water arrows. They did not even have the chance to retaliate. Grim exited his fiery form and returned to his human form, watching the battle of the water elemental army silently. Although he did not have a good impression of the cold-eyed water prophet Lorenz, the water elemental army that he had summoned was truly amazing. If he used the flame army that he had summoned to fight against the water elemental army, they would definitely win. This did not mean that the fire elementals could not defeat the water elementals, but that the flame army was just cannon fodder that Grimm had summoned from another world, and not his own troops. On the other hand, the water elemental army was well organized, and the few high-level water elementals that acted as the core of the army had decent intelligence. Of course, there was no way that they could win against a regular army with inferior troops. However, if Grimm could gather a group of magic machines from his family, he was confident that he could crush these water elementals. Battles are about calmness, steadiness, and intelligence. You fellows who play with fire are too impulsive. It's hard for you to become outstanding commanders. Lorenz, the water prophet, couldn't help but speak excitedly when he saw that the situation had turned out to be advantageous for him. However, the sarcasm in his words caused those who were observant to frown. Humph. No matter how many low-level creatures there are, they are just cannon fodder that could be easily destroyed in the eyes of a powerhouse. The energy spent on so many little fellows might as well be used to strengthen themselves. Otherwise, if you meet an opponent of the same level, how much can these cannon fodder help you? Grimm had long disliked this waterman and retorted without holding back. Hearing Grimm's reply, the eyes of the water prophet could not help but narrow. From what you're saying, you're stronger than me. That's not necessarily true. However, we've never fought before, so who can say for sure? Grimm was still as calm as ever. Seeing that the two of them were getting angrier and angrier, the swamp sage mote, who was standing at the side, felt a headache coming on and hurriedly interrupted. All right, let's not talk about this for now. Look, that Gorfus seems to have appeared again. As expected, in the center of the ogre camp, the ogre chief Gorfus, who had hurriedly hidden and healed himself, reappeared. He was holding a thick stone rod that he had found somewhere and waved it around like the wind. In the blink of an eye, he had destroyed a team of close to 100 water elementals. Although the high-level water elementals were casting slow spells on him with all their might, it was a pity that the difference in their levels was too great, and most of the slow spells were directly resisted. Even if they succeeded, the slow spells would not last for more than half a second. After a short period of healing, Gorfus became lively again, shaking his fat body as he stomped on the ground. Water splashed everywhere the stone rod went, and the rhythm of the water elemental's attacks was completely disrupted. If the low-level water elementals got close to Gorfus, they would be crushed by the terrifying shockwaves. The ogre chief ignored the hundreds of water arrows and smashed the high-level water elementals into splashes. And this was after Golfus's warhammer was stolen by Grimm. Otherwise, the water elemental army would have suffered even greater losses when the two warhammers swept through the area. This Gorfus is still as brave as ever. Grimm could not help but clap his hands in praise. He then glanced at Lorenz. Why, some braggart is just going to watch his subordinates get slaughtered? If you summon a few more water elementals, you might really have the chance to tire out that ogre chief. Hearing Grimm's cold words, Moat immediately knew that things were not going well, but it was too late. The water prophet Lorenz snorted angrily and said in a shrill voice, "Don't think that you're the only ones who can rule the battlefield. The terrifying power of the water elementals is not something you can imagine. Now, I will show you the power of the water elementals." With that, Lorenz turned into a wave and charged into the battlefield with a loud crash. Waveform. This was the physical form of the water prophet when it moved quickly. Its arrival instantly attracted Gorfus's attention and alertness. Both sides were veteran experts of the wetland swamp, so they were naturally familiar with each other. Seeing the huge wave rush in front of him and condense back into the shape of a tall waterman, Gorfus swung his stone rod as if it was flying. Then, he suddenly stopped and shouted, "Lorenz, are you trying to kill all of us Ankro's ogres?" Along the way, the huge wave also swept up 4 to 5 ogre warriors. At this moment, Lorenz, who had turned into a waterman, slowly pulled the half-drowned ogre warriors out of his stomach and threw them to the side. He then looked down at the ogre chief and said calmly, "Gorfus, withdraw from the Mospoor tribe's alliance and draw a clear line with them. I can allow you to continue living in the wetland swamp. Otherwise," just as he said the word otherwise, Lorenz waved his hands, and a large cloud of water mist flew out from the surrounding ponds, waterways, and swamps, condensing into thousands of strange water arrows in the air. The cold arrowheads glinted coldly under the dim light as they slowly adjusted their direction and aimed at Gorfus, who was standing with his staff. Gorfus's expression immediately turned ugly. The water arrows summoned by the water prophet Lorenz and the water arrows summoned by low-level water elementals could not be mentioned in the same breath. In the battle just now, Gorfus had been able to withstand the attacks of hundreds of water arrows because of his fat body and terrifying elemental resistance. The water arrows of low-level water elementals could not even penetrate his skin and would explode into a puddle of water. Thus, he was not afraid no matter how many there were. However, the water arrows summoned by the water prophet Lorenz were all solid and filled with water elementals. Even Gorfus would frown when he sensed them, being shot by thousands of such water arrows. Even with the terrifying might of the ogre chief, his heart trembled, and he could not help but show fear in his eyes. However, just as the ogre chief was in a dilemma and did not know what to do, a low and muffled voice suddenly sounded from the battlefield. "Lorenz, after sleeping for hundreds of years, I think your brain is about to turn into mush. Helping outsiders to deal with your companions in the wetland swamp. Is this what you, the water prophet, should do?" "Umph." As the voice sounded, the water mist in the distance dispersed, and two equally tall and terrifying figures stepped into the battlefield step by step. Finson and Cratch. The two of them are finally here. Chapter 12:11. Farnson arrived at the scene while riding on an exceptionally large fungus giant. This was a terrifying fungus giant with the strength of an early-stage Tier 4 monster. The surface of its body was covered in furry green hyphae, and several octopus-like tentacles of different thicknesses extended from the ends of its two thick and long upper limbs. They were constantly wriggling and stretching, making it look very strange. On its shoulder, a half-meter-tall spore man with strange mage webs all over its body stood there quietly. Its limbs had merged into the giant's body. At first glance, most people would think that the spore man was just an appendage of the grade 4 fungus giant. It was hard to imagine that such a gigantic giant was actually being controlled by such an inconspicuous little fellow. Beside the fungus giant stood another giant. The swamp giant's body was covered in green moss and lichens, and the parasitic algae that looked like whips, as well as the cysts that varied in green and gray. At first glance, the swamp giant did not seem to be any different from the other swamp giants that Grimm had seen before. But after careful observation, Grimm could still sense the violent energy within the swamp giant's body. Under the scanning of Grimm's AI chip, the images projected by the swamp giants were all a glaring blood red. This meant that if Grimm was not careful, he could fall at their hands. Even the defeated ogre chief had the ability and means to kill him if Grimm gave him the chance. No matter who it was, before they were completely defeated, they couldn't let their guard down. Seeing that the enemy's reinforcements had arrived, Water Prophet Lorenz did not hold back anymore. Almost as soon as the enemy appeared, thousands of water arrows whizzed towards Gorfus. Gorfus was shocked, and the thick stone staff in his hand danced as though it was flying, knocking away and smashing away most of the water arrows. But the dense rain of water arrows still made him look like a porcupine with its fur standing on end. His entire appearance was pitiful. However, the physique of a grade 4 ogre was sturdy enough. Even though it was in such a miserable state, it was only injured and not killed. In fact, the injuries in front of it could only be considered as light injuries. Gorfus used his weapon to protect his vital parts and struggled out of the attack range of the water arrow. Only then did he stop his stone rod while panting heavily. It bent down and looked at the water arrows that pierced its body. It snorted angrily, and a violent energy wave swept through its body. All the water arrows were instantly shattered, and the indigo blood splattered everywhere. Even with such a heavy injury, Gorfus still endured it without frowning. The muscles all over his body squirmed and contracted, and he even sealed the hundreds of wounds at the same time to stop his power from flowing out. After doing all this, Gorfus repositioned himself and walked to the side of his two companions, glaring at the enemies in front of him. The water prophet Lorenz wanted to continue chasing after the ogre chief, but he was called back by the swamp sage moat. Both parties stepped forward and faced each other across a pond that was nearly 100 meters wide. On one side was the swamp sage moat, the water prophet Lorenz, and the legendary fire wizard Grim. On the other side was the Mosport chief Farnson, the swamp lord Cratch, and the ogre chief Gorfus. A small area actually contained 6 grade 4 ogre. If such a scene were to spread, it would definitely shock all the native creatures of the wetland swamp. At least, in the tens of thousands of years of history of the wetland swamp, such a scene was extremely rare. After all, the lifespan of the creatures in the spirit realm was 10 times longer than that of creatures in ordinary dimensions. Thus, their way of looking at and solving problems was abnormally slow and complicated. If Grimm had not participated in the wetland swamp matter, it would not have been a problem to delay it for another 100 or 200 years. Lord Moat, the situation today doesn't seem right. 3 against 3, both sides are evenly matched, and we don't seem to have much of an advantage. What? You're not using an outsider like me as your main force, are you? Grimm endured the ogre chief's death stare without batting an eyelid, while conversing with the swamp sage using mental language. The meaning behind his words was very clear. He was just an outsider who happened to pass by unintentionally, and was only participating because of the ogre chief's promise. Now that he had completed his mission, he no longer had any obligation to continue helping the swamp sage's side. Moat, the sage of the swamp, stared at the other side with a stern expression, but he was secretly communicating with Grimm in private. Lord Grimm is an important guest from the Magus world. How can I treat you poorly? I've already given you all the good stuff I've made over the years as a reward for the previous mission. What else do you want from me? It's just a few mushroom seeds. Lord Moat doesn't have to care. Moreover, these mushrooms are very difficult to grow, and who knows if they'll survive after we leave this place. If they don't succeed, all my hard work here will be in vain. Hee. Lord Grimm, why are you trying to deceive me? Since you have Amelia, the former Mosport princess, under your command, why don't you take some of your subordinates with you before you leave? The Mosport clan is the top expert in growing magic plants in the spirit realm. So what's the problem of growing a few special mushrooms? Hee. I've never considered this problem before, but since Lord Moat has reminded me, I'll definitely consider it carefully. That's right, Lord Grimm. The 9-headed Python King and Ching will be here soon. Although we have the advantage in terms of the number of powerhouses, if we really fight with them, we won't be able to win easily. Why? You want to hire me to fight on your behalf? There's no need for that. After all, this is an internal affair of the wetland swamp, and if you get too involved, you'll incur the dissatisfaction of many of the swamp's powerhouses. Then what do you want me to do? I want to know what you're planning behind my back, Lord. I'm just an outsider. What can I plan here? Lord Grimm, we're all smart people, so there's no need to hide anything. Since you've lured Farnson out so enthusiastically, and the Mosport princess's subordinates aren't here. Could it be that you're planning to start a war, trap us here, and then sneak into the Mosport people's sacred land? The people in front of him were all old fellas who had lived for nearly 1,000 years, and they were also the wetland swamp's turf, so it was a joke for Grimm and his men to hide their every move from them. Although the smile on Grimm's face did not diminish, the light in his eyes became dangerous after being seen through. Why? Do you still want to stop me? No. I think you might have misunderstood. Although the things you've arranged behind my back are a little out of line, it doesn't violate our agreement. So, I'm happy to see it happen. But what? I hope that when you're carrying out your plan, you might as well help us with something. How? When the battle is at its most intense, I hope that you can help to temporarily transfer Farnson away." Hearing this, Grim vaguely understood something and said softly, "You want me to create some trouble in the Mosepor's sacred land and lure Farnson back. This way, the other party will have one less core member, and the remaining two will not be a threat to you." "Yes, that's right." Grim lowered his head and pondered for a moment, and could not help but shake his head. "I don't like this suggestion. That Farnson looked like a troublesome fellow. If I were to lure him back, it would most likely lead to a disastrous outcome for my plan. I'm not willing to fight with a grade 4 in his territory. Your actions will gain the goodwill of all the wetland swamp lords. Who knows if I'll come to such a place again? Your goodwill is useless against me. 1,000-year Trent's heart. The average lifespan of a Trant is more than 4,000 years. 1,000-year Trent's heart is only a grade 3 item. And a meteorite gem. Meteorite gems were never a special product of the material plane, but came from the depths of the vast and boundless sea of stars. Such an item naturally had a special power that the plane did not have. However, the specific power of each meteorite gem needed to be carefully appraised to be sure. Before it was appraised, it would forever be mysterious and unknown. Hence, in the value system of the Magus world, the meteorite gem was a strange item with an undetermined rank. If the gem was appraised to be powerful enough, it would be a genuine grade 4 item. However, if it was appraised to be trash, it would be a grade 3 item. Grim could not help but hesitate. A grade 3 item and a suspected grade 4 item. Such a value was enough to buy him out. However, this mission concerned Alice's life. Hence, although Grim was somewhat tempted, his rationality still made him shake his head repeatedly. The two did not talk behind the back of the water prophet, Lorenz. At this moment, Lorenz suddenly interrupted. "I have a water soul jade here. It can provide a contestant with 2 opportunities to use their full strength. With this water soul jade, there shouldn't be any problems, right? Water soul jade. 2 opportunities to use their full strength." One had to know that the water prophet, Lorenz, was a high-grade grade 4 powerhouse. If he could summon his full strength in the plane world, he might be able to instantly kill those grade 4 fellows if they were caught off guard. Anyone who had this water soul jade was equivalent to having 2 extra lives. Any rational person would not easily reject such an offer. Chapter 12:12. This was a small, dark, and eerie cave. As it was underground, the walls of the cave were covered in moss and lichens, emitting a cold, faint glow in the darkness. However, at this moment, a slender and graceful black figure was standing on a small clearing in the center of the crypt. She squatted down and silently carved a strange spell formation on the cold, damp, and hard stone floor. A small-scale positioning spell formation, 33 mysterious runes, and 288 rune lines. Every stroke must not have the slightest error. Otherwise, not only would he not be able to guide his master here, he would even trigger a terrifying spell backlash and expose the existence of this secret passage. Without the spiritual force of a high-ranked magus, such an arduous and complicated task would be very difficult to complete. The reason why high-ranked magi revered spiritual force so much was because it allowed them to maintain data processing and spiritual force perception that was comparable to a superbrain. High-ranked and above spell formations would easily have hundreds of spell runes stacked densely together. As for the wizard lines that guided the flow of energy, they were as thin as silk and as dense as a cow's hair. Without a godly brain, it was impossible to use such a thing. And this was just a high-ranked spell formation. As for the super spell formations, they were even more terrifying, becoming 3-dimensional. In order to memorize the complicated rune lines and the witchcraft runes that were as dense as the stars in the sky, one would have to grow a huge brain like the heterotopic brain to complete such a terrifying mission if one did not have super strong mental strength. After spending half a day, Amelia finally completed the positioning spell formation. She used her spiritual force to scan the spell formation a few more times, making sure that there were no mistakes. Only then did she take out a dozen high-ranked magic crystals from her bosom, carefully placing them in a few of the spell formation's energy cores. After a while, Amelia finally activated the spell formation. A faint glow of energy flowed out from the energy cores, flowing along the guiding wizard lines that had been drawn in advance. Wherever it passed, all the spell runes, magic nodes, and spell lines were lit up. An almost undetectable wave of magic began to surge in the cave, passing through the stone walls and rock layers, slowly traveling into the distance. Moments later, as if receiving a response from afar, the spell formation began to operate more frequently. From a moment the spell formation began to operate, the changes in energy could no longer be concealed or shielded. Strange roars and roars could be vaguely heard from countless layers of rock, followed by the sounds of the rock walls collapsing. The rock walls shattered layer by layer, and the strange roars grew closer and closer. Amelia lowered her head to look at the positioning spell formation that had already been activated to its limits. She gritted her teeth and immediately armed herself, charging into the darkness without looking back. Shortly after, concentrated explosions of spells could be heard from the depths of the secret passage, mixed with the furious roars of the fungus giant and the strange sounds of its cavities cracking. At this critical moment of life and death, a 2-meter-tall human silhouette suddenly appeared in the center of the positioning spell formation. The air was filled with the whistling sound of energy flowing. Bits and pieces of fire elements were separated from the void, and like moths flying into a flame, they flew into the human-shaped shadow. Gradually, the silhouette's appearance became clearer, showing signs of turning from illusory to solid. As if dissatisfied with the speed at which the silhouette was condensing, Grimm's crisp and clear voice came from the void. As if dissatisfied with the speed at which the silhouette was condensing, Grimm's crisp and clear voice came from the void. "This is too slow. All of you, get over here." As a majestic spiritual will appeared in the silhouette, the entire underground space suddenly became dark red. Countless fire elemental particles were extracted from the void by the powerful will, gathering into the silhouette like rivers returning to the sea. Grimm's hands, feet, shoulders, back, chest, abdomen, head, and all the organs in his body began to grow in an almost transparent manner, quickly fusing into a whole body. Asterisk thud. Asterisk Grimm stepped out of the positioning spell formation with a flaming coral staff in hand. His powerful spiritual force swept out in all directions, and in an instant, he understood everything within a few dozen miles. With his powerful spiritual sense, he could clearly see that he was in a narrow, secret passage in a huge underground labyrinth. 60 meters in front of him, Amelia had already transformed into a demonic woman with countless rattan tentacles, desperately defending against the attacks of a few tall fungus giants. Although Amelia had the title of demonic woman, she was actually just a plant-type wizard who specialized in crafty tactics. When it came to crafty and changing tactics, she was definitely one of the best among Grade 2 wizards. However, when it came to direct confrontation, she was obviously not a match for the fungus giants. Not to mention, one of the fungus giants was a Tier 3 advanced monster. If it wasn't for the fact that Gargamel had poured his heart and soul into this daughter of his and equipped her with the best magic tools he could find, she wouldn't have been able to survive until Grimm arrived. Amelia's rope-like rattan tentacles surged madly towards the fungus giant that had broken through the wall, but the latter's thick and powerful tentacles wrapped around and tore her tentacles into pieces. Green juices flowed all over the ground. Amelia's petite body lit up with 4 or 5 green orbs of light. With the support of so many wizard artifacts, Amelia endured the pain and roared in anger, producing more and denser rattan tentacles to entangle the fungus giant that was attacking crazily. Win with numbers, win with quality with quantity. Amelia was like a demonic woman with infinite regenerative abilities. Dense, strange rattan tentacles stretched out from her body and blocked the way of the fungus giants. Even though the tentacles outside of her body were torn apart and green juice splattered everywhere, Amelia did not take a step back and firmly guarded the secret passage that led to the underground cave. Sensing the increasingly intense energy fluctuations in the depths of the secret passage, the fungus giants attacked even more fiercely. Meanwhile, the Tier 3 giant roared and charged into the Rot-Tan array, struggling madly to get to the center of the array. Even with the help of many magic tools, it was futile to fight against a Grade 3 enemy with a Grade 2 body. As the Grade 3 giant got closer and closer to Amelia, the indigo and purplish-black tentacles were about to touch her body. A gentle male voice that she had been waiting for a long time finally echoed in her mind. "All right, you can rest now. I'll take over from here." It was the master. Hearing this voice, Amelia's heart relaxed, and the thousands of pain that came from the end of her body overlapped and instantly engulfed her soul. Amelia screamed and almost fainted. All the Rot-Tan tentacles that were flying in the air drooped down, having lost their spiritual control. The Grade 3 fungus giant that had lost its Rot-Tan tentacles roared and took a step forward, its thick and powerful tentacles smashing towards Amelia. "How dare you act so presumptuously in front of me?" A tall figure appeared just in time, grabbing Amelia's limp body. He raised his staff high in his other hand and blocked the incoming tentacle with brute force. The crimson staff and the indigo and purplish-black tentacles clashed in the air, and the sizzling sound of flames could be heard from the point of contact. The terrifying flames caused the Grade 3 fungus giant indescribable pain. It staggered back a few steps, regaining its footing before looking at the other side with a serious expression. On the surface of its limp tentacle, a charred scar could be seen clearly. "Grade 4? You're Grade 4? The Grade 3 fungus giant was knowledgeable. I was able to discern Grimm's identity based on the fire elemental aura emanating from his body. Soon after, its gaze fell on Amelia, and a trace of shock and anger suddenly appeared on its ugly greenish-gray face. "Amelia, you have the aura of Amelia's soul on you. You're the magical spore princess that escaped." Grimm paid no heed to the other party's fuss and reached out to brush Amelia's forehead. As a strand of spiritual force seeped in, Amelia's intense pain was instantly reduced by half. "So, do you want to keep this guy alive or kill him?" Grimm asked calmly. From his tone, it seemed like killing a puny Grade 3 fungus giant would be a piece of cake. "Uncle Elson, are you willing to follow Fawn's son and commit evil, or are you willing to follow me again? I'll only give you this one chance." Amelia raised her beautiful face, and her gaze fell on the Grade 3 fungus giant's body. The Grade 3 fungus giant's face revealed a sinister expression, and it raised its huge tentacle once more. "Amelia, stop being so hypocritical. Since when have we, the fungus giants, ever had true freedom? You shouldn't have come back, Di." With that, the thick tentacles swung down, and the howling wind it brought was even fiercer than before. "Humph, you don't know what's good for you," Grimm snorted, and without anyone noticing, a faint red elemental barrier shot out from his body, enveloping all the fungus giants in it. Burning Domain, such an elemental barrier might not be enough to deal with opponents of the same tier, but against a large number of low-tier enemies, it was a terrifying killing weapon. The moment the Burning Domain was formed, all the fungus giants burst into flames, and their entire bodies began to burn. The Grade 3 fungus giant was no exception. Chapter 12:13. It was the descent of the god of fire. When Grimm transformed into a tall, flaming humanoid, he walked through the underground palace with Amelia in his arms. Wherever he went, flames immediately appeared and flew everywhere. Not to mention the ordinary Mozpor tribe. Even the terrifying rank 2 and 3 fungus giants and swamp creatures could not survive for more than 10 seconds in the Burning Domain. Grimm left behind a trail of twisted and strange, charred bodies as he walked. From the traces left on them, one could see how much pain and despair they had suffered before they died. This was a sacred land that the Mozpor race had set up for centuries. Almost every corner was filled with swamp creatures that had been infected by the Mozpor, and almost every corner was filled with dangerous and terrifying magical traps. But all of these were so insignificant in Grimm's eyes. As Grimm advanced, he used the AI chip to scan his surroundings. Secret passages, dark rooms, cracks in the ground, traps, mechanisms, ambushes. Nothing could escape Grimm's eyes. His way of dealing with all of this was simple and violent. Flames, arrows, fireballs. All forms of fire spells were unleashed at his will. In the face of such a great disparity in strength, all schemes and tactics were useless. He could just use fire to flatten them. The 30-meter, winding stone path in front of him was densely covered in magic traps. In Grimm's eyes, the radiance of energy was blood red, and he could not ignore it even if he wanted to. A wave of fire surged forward, and all the magic traps were triggered prematurely. A series of loud booms and terrifying elemental explosions erupted. However, apart from turning the winding stone path into a honeycomb, it did not harm Grimm at all. After advancing a few meters, there was a narrow passageway in front of him, barely enough for a fungus giant to squeeze through. The stone walls on both sides of the passageway flickered with energy. Grimm focused his eyes, increasing the AI chip scanning power. He immediately saw through the 1-meter thick stone wall and saw the dense red figures hiding behind the secret doors on both sides of the stone wall. Grimm snorted coldly, and with a tap of the staff in his left hand, the burning domain immediately extended into the stone wall. In less than a few seconds, the spies inside the door were screaming in pain from being burned, and the 2 secret doors were also burned red. Attack! Attack! Rush out and attack. There seemed to be a leader among the red figures, and it roared out an order. The secret doors on both sides parted to the left and right, and the ambushers who were burning miserably decided to rush out to fight Grimm. Unfortunately, they were trapped in the death trap that they had set up for Grimm. Since the terrain was sealed and the passageway was narrow, the ambushers who rushed out were stuck inside the passageway, unable to form a formation. Grimm made use of this opportunity to seal off their escape route with 3 inferno walls. He then casually cast a flaming storm at the place where the life energy was the most intense. Raging flames swirled in the air, and the heat waves were scorching. The sound of burning flesh never stopped, and the mournful screams and wails rose and fell one after another, filling the air. However, the more enemies he burned, the less he could smell the pungent, burnt smell of the past. Instead, he could smell the extremely rich scent of plants. Specks of green light were constantly emitted from the dead, scorched body of the lurker. Anyone who smelled it couldn't help but feel refreshed and refreshed. Plant elemental particles were indeed the most docile magical particles in the world. Even a fire wizard like Grimm would feel refreshed and elated after inhaling such a dense concentration of plant elemental particles. As for Amelia, who was lying in Grimm's arms, she felt much better after absorbing a large amount of these elemental particles. Using an inferno wall to seal off the path and a flaming storm to clear it away, followed by a few exploding fireballs. It was such a simple and crude method, but when paired with Grimm's extraordinary fire abilities and mental strength, it was impossible to deal with, and it made one feel despair. Wave after wave of ambushers rushed out from their hiding places. Before they could gather, Grimm's fire spell had already descended on them. He didn't even need to cast flame penetration or empower flames. Just the basic damage of the fire spell was enough to wipe out all the enemies with ulterior motives. Even when passing through some special secret passages and dark rooms, Grimm would use a fireball to blast open the door with Amelia's reminder. He would then throw a ball of flames in, and the world would be peaceful once again. Grimm was like a child carrying a pot of boiling water and looking for an ant nest. The enemy's so-called ambush, the enemy's so-called trap, the enemy's so-called counterattack, in his eyes, they were all so weak, so powerless. All he needed to do was to vent his anger. "Master, this doesn't seem to be in line with our original plan. right? Shouldn't we prioritize destroying and controlling the magic spore hub in the sacred land? We're moving so slowly now. What if Fenton receives the news and teleports back? Although Amelia was having a splitting headache, she still quickly discovered the problem. There was no need to eliminate these hidden ambushers and the sacred land guards one by one. It was more important to directly break into the magic spore hub and control the most important magic spore seed in the sacred land. But now, Grimm seemed to have enough time and confidence. Not only was he not anxious, he even played with the group of guards with great interest. This really puzzled her. But the master had the reputation of a legendary fire wizard. How could he make such a lowly mistake? Hence, Amelia could only ask softly, not daring to have the slightest suspicion. Grimm smiled indifferently, a cunning look on his face that was condensed from flames. I'm so slow on purpose. Then that's right, I'm waiting for that Fenton to teleport back. Amelia, if this opportunity is good, we might even be able to avenge your family. Amelia took a deep breath, her pretty little face filled with disbelief. Although she had led Grimm to invade the wetland swamp and the magic spore sacred land, she had never expected to get rid of that Fenton. It was not for anything else, but out of respect for a grade 4 powerhouse. It was difficult to understand and comprehend the power of a grade 4 creature without traveling outside. Only those who had lived in a higher plane like the sorcerer world would have a deeper understanding of the terrifying might of a grade 4 creature known as a demigod. Take the current situation as an example. The Magic Spore tribe had worked hard in this sacred land for hundreds of years to create an indestructible and terrifying land of death filled with traps. However, once the grade 4 creature was gone, the sacred land would be invaded by Grimm, and the resulting battle would not be like a battle, but a massacre. The terrifying gap between a grade 3 and a grade 4 creature was not something that could be made up for with numbers. Moreover, the one who invaded the sacred land was not someone else, but Grimm, who was considered a tough opponent among the grade 4 powerhouses. With this addition and subtraction, it was conceivable that the most poor sacred land would suffer such hardships. Facing another grade 4 creature, even if that Fenton was not known for his combat prowess, Grimm must have a certain level of confidence to dare to say such words. Based on Amelia's understanding of the legendary patriarch, he had never boasted that he couldn't fulfill his promise. Hence, the nervous Amelia shut her mouth and began to think about the possible trump card the family had had. With her intelligence, she quickly noticed some clues. The positioning spell formation from before was especially difficult to operate. With the family head's strength, it was merely 1,000 miles away, so why did it seem so difficult and dangerous to teleport over? If the family head had just teleported over from the Onloss Ogre camp normally, the spell formation would not have nearly collapsed. From this, it could be deduced that with the help of the positioning spell formation, the family head might have gotten a helper from the sorcerer world. Could it be Madame Mary? Thinking of this, Amelia could not help but poke her head out of Grimm's embrace and secretly scanned the hidden corners of the cave, hoping to find traces of the other party. This was also because Grimm had done a good job in keeping things a secret. She did not even know the existence of the Shadow Fiend. Hence, she could not discover that an unimaginably terrifying assassin had already infiltrated Grimm's back. Magic Spore Hall. This was the core and the most important place in the depths of the Magic Pod Cave. In a huge water cavern, a strange and tall demonic pod stood tall, almost taking up half of the space in the cavern. Many spore men gathered around the tree and seemed to be busy with something. The roots of this strange magic pod did not penetrate into the soil, but were buried in a mountain of bones. Its exposed trunk was more than 10 meters thick, with dozens of thick branches and leaves separating from it. The green leaves at the end of the branches formed a strange mouth shape, with sharp saw teeth and terrifying mucus at the edge. The busy spore men were chasing swamp creatures that were controlled by the magic spores, making them obediently lie down at the feet of the magic pod. Every time this happened, the magic pod would stretch its thick roots, wrap up the swamp creatures, and throw them into the air. The magic pods that looked like green mouths would fight to be the first to open their mouths, frantically tearing and devouring the flesh and blood of their prey. Every time after a full meal, the dozens of terrifying mouths on the magic pod's trunk would burp contentedly, then droop its branches lazily and close its eyes for a short rest. Chapter 12:14. Most of the swamp creatures would never have thought that the true master of the Mospoor clan that had been running amok in the wetland swamp was not Farnson, but this magical pod with strange powers. In essence, the Mospoor clan was just the servant separated from the magical pod to take care of and serve it. At that moment, sensing that the powerful threat on the periphery was getting closer and closer to its living area, the magical pod frantically waved its green branches. Dozens of big green mouths opened and closed continuously, using a unique psychic wave to call for its servants. As for the servant who was trapped in the distant battlefield and could not escape, this was not within the scope of the magical pod's consideration. Therefore, with the magical pod's strange and ear-piercing squeaking sound, a teleportation door suddenly opened in the cave. Farnson, who was on the battlefield, was resisting the crazy bombardment from the opposite side while squeezing out of the teleportation door in a disheveled manner. As soon as he squeezed out of the door, Farnson turned around and shot a green wave of light, trying to maintain the existence of the light door so that the other two allies could be teleported back. But unfortunately, Cratch only had time to squeeze half of his body out before he was dragged back by a green tentacle that appeared out of thin air. Then, the teleportation door shook for a while, and under Farnson's painful gaze, it burst into countless scattered fireflies. "Great ruler, why did you summon me back in such a hurry?" Since the situation could not be salvaged, Farnson no longer worried about the two puppets that were trapped outside. He hurriedly knelt in front of the magical pod and asked loudly, "Enemy, intruder, quickly destroy the intruder." The magical pod was also an extremely terrifying magical plant. Compared to humans, its thinking was not as active, but this did not mean that it was stupid. On the contrary, this terrifying magical pod had a powerful and ferocious nature. Its individual strength had even reached the Advanced Grade 4. The Advanced Grade 4 magical pod and the Elementary Grade 4 Farnson. This was the biggest trump card that the Mospoor clan could bring out. Moat, the sage of the swamp, obviously knew something about this, but he did not reveal anything to Grim. Instead, he added fuel to the fire and lured Grim to the demon pod cave happily. As for Amelia, she had only been the Mospoor princess for a short period of time. She had not grown to the point where she would be chosen by the magic pod, so she did not know much about the power of the magic pod. Hence, in a state of confusion, Grim brought Amelia, Remy, who had sneaked into the cave, and the Shadowlings, who were invisible, and recklessly barged into the magic spore hall. The 1-meter-thick secret door quickly turned into a pool of magma under the scorching crimson flames. Grim carried Amelia and strode into the magic spore hall. From the AI chip's exploration of the secret cave map, this was the most important core area of the entire Mospoor sacred land. Therefore, before breaking in, Grim had already imagined the mountains of resources, materials, secret treasures, magical beast cores, and other items that might be inside. However, when he really stepped in, he was shocked by the terrifying magic potion in front of him. Amelia might not be able to appraise the rank and terror of this magic potion, but Grim could. With the AI chip's super energy detector, no high-energy creature could escape Grim's eyes as long as they did not have the means to conceal or shield their energy aura. High Grade 4. When he scanned the terrifying energy reaction in the magic pod, Grim's expression instantly changed. After sensing the strange aura, the magic pod's thick body that was more than 100 meters tall suddenly twisted, and all its green mouths aimed at Grim. At the feet of the magic pod, Farnson was perched on the head of a fungus giant. Both his hands and feet had sunk into the giant's head, and he was controlling it to approach Grim step by step. The situation had changed. The enemy's strength had exceeded his original estimation. Grim casually opened a gap in the flames in front of him, stuffed Amelia into it, and flattened it with his hand. There was no place for a Grade 3 creature in a Grade 4 battlefield. So as soon as the battle began, Grim stuffed Amelia into a temporary flame space and left Remy outside the hall. He carefully examined the two enemies he was about to face. Terrifying, extremely terrifying, the energy overflowing from the enemies' bodies was green, indicating that they were of the plant type. In this aspect, Grim had a slight advantage. After all, fire was the enemy of all plants, and even more so, their nemesis. However, the intensity of the energy on their bodies was too dazzling, and this undoubtedly caused Grim to become somewhat worried. Damned intruder, I'll devour you. The magic pod seemed to have a particularly violent and savage nature. Once it saw an enemy, it would lose control. The thick stem of the magic pod swept over with a hum, and the three green mouths that bore the brunt of the attack opened to their limits, bringing with them a whistling wind as they ruthlessly bit down. Evade! 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 Danger detected. Host, please evade immediately. The A.I. Chip's warning sounded in his mind, but the enemy's attack was too fast, and it was already too late to evade. Grim waved his staff, and 3 layers of lava shields appeared out of thin air, blocking the path of the magic pod's attack. Unfortunately, the moment the lava shields appeared, they were smashed to pieces by the green vines that came from the sky, and the 3 green mouths appeared in front of Grim without any obstruction. In the blink of an eye, a flaming force field appeared in front of Grim, blocking the 3 green mouths from devouring him. Asterisk boom. Asterisk Grim was like a spinning top that had been whipped by a naughty child. He flew out in an instant, smashing into a stone wall behind him, and his whole body was embedded in it. The 3 green mouths swayed dizzily for a long time before regaining consciousness. As for the magical flames on the green branches, they were silently extinguished under the confinement of a mysterious force. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Ferentsen commanded the fungus giant to charge over, obviously wanting to take advantage of the situation. What great strength! Grim only shook his head for a moment and quickly returned to normal. The A.I. Chip took the opportunity to project a terrifying number in his mind. 46 points of strength. This was the terrifying strength that the enemy had displayed in their first encounter. Grim spat out a mouthful of blood, which fell on a pile of broken rocks, and turned into a purple flame that burned fiercely. He pulled his body out of the stone wall with difficulty. His originally tall and strong chest had already caved in, and his flaming torso was covered with terrifying cracks. Some of the cracks were so big that even the lava flowing at high speed inside was flowing out. The enemy was indeed terrifying. His delicate body that was similar to a carnivorous magic plant actually had 46 points of strength. This was enough to crush Grim's weak strength of 27 points. Just now, Grim was caught off guard, and his defense was directly broken by the enemy's strength. That was why he ended up in such a miserable state. Seeing Ferentsen rushing over, Grim waved the staff in his hand and summoned 3 streams of crimson flames to rush towards him, preventing him from advancing any further. A white light appeared on Grim's body, and he quickly used pure holy light to heal his broken body. His collapsed chest slowly swelled up, and with the help of the powerful flame energy from the core of the law, his damaged body gradually recovered to normal. However, this short healing was only half done, and Grim had no choice but to use flame leap to escape. Just as his towering body disappeared, another thick branch of the magic pod ruthlessly smashed into the place where he had stood. The branches that were as soft as tender green saplings were as hard as cast iron at this moment. With a whip, rocks shattered, and the earth trembled. A dense spider web of terrifying cracks appeared on the stone floor. Grim had just appeared in another corner of the hall, 300 meters away, and the magic pod had quickly captured his energy aura. The terrifying body that occupied almost half of the space in the hall twisted and turned, and once again lashed out with a terrifying gust of wind. As the stem lashed out, The green mouths at the ends of the branches also took the opportunity to bite him. Grim had a feeling that if he was bitten by these green mouths, the result would be even more miserable and terrifying than being whipped. Damn it, where did such a terrifying monster come from? No, I have to slowly test its true strength. Grim gnashed his teeth, and with a roar, he leaped out again. He was prepared for this dodge, and as soon as he condensed his body, he threw a terrifying crimson flame storm towards the roots of the magic pod that could not move. The tens of green mouths of the magic pod cursed at the same time, and a cloud of green smoke shot out to resist the crimson flame storm. In the air, the green smoke and the sudden eruption of flames collided, engulfed, and annihilated each other. A crimson flame storm with 890 degrees of damage was neutralized just like that. Grim frowned slightly. What a strong poison! His physical strength was so strong, and his poison attack was so fierce. This guy was very difficult to deal with. However, Grim was not an ordinary fire wizard, and the power he possessed was unimaginable. He leaped out again, dodging the joint attack of the magic pod and Ferentsen. As soon as he landed, Grim stuck his magic staff in the ground in front of him and quickly waved his hands. In one breath, he summoned several violent fireballs and smashed them towards the body of the magic pod. Meanwhile, the demonic pod hissed strangely and used its green branches to smash the fireballs into pieces. Chapter 12:15. Where did this attack come from? For a moment, the magic pod was confused by the crimson flame storm. It had already blocked all the attacks from the legendary fire wizard. So where did this crimson flame storm come from? The magic pod shook its body violently and sprayed out a thick, smoke-like poisonous mist from its stem. It screeched and urged its servants to attack the enemy. Most of its attention was focused on searching for the hidden enemy. Facing the onslaught of spore men, swamp creatures, and Farnson, who was riding on a Tier 4 fungus giant, Grim once again used Flame Leap to escape their attack range. As soon as he emerged from another region, Grim quickly cast spells again, directing a series of crimson fireballs towards the demonic pods. The magic pod could only brandish its branches and vines to receive the baptism of the fireballs. But it was exactly the same as the last time. Even though it had destroyed all the fireballs, there was still a terrifying fire spell that suddenly exploded on its stem, igniting a small part of its body. Although the magic pod was not as cunning as humans, it was not stupid. Based on these two attacks, it quickly determined that the enemy must have some kind of ability that could make spells invisible. Only when the spell was detonated would it know whether it was attacked or not. Making a formed spell invisible? Such an ability was unheard of, but the threat it posed was also extremely terrifying. The magic pod could only try its best to drive Grim away before using the poisonous mist to extinguish the flames on its body. In just a short while, the magic pod's body, which occupied almost half of the hall, had many black burn marks that could not be removed. Some of the damaged stems glowed with green, viscous juice, which slowly flowed out, filling the entire hall with a pungent stench. The pain from the burning flames tortured the magic pod to death. Long green vines and green mouths smashed the floor and stone walls of the hall into pieces. However, that little guy who was as tiny as a mouse in front of an elephant relied on his elusive flame leaped to move around the hall, causing all of its attacks to hit nothing but air. As for its slaves, apart from Ferentsen, who was able to withstand the shock waves of the berserk flames, the rest were all turned into a pile of charcoal, unable to stand up again. The power of the magic pod was strong enough, but its weakness was also very obvious. Unable to move, afraid of fire. As a Tier 4 advanced demonic creature, the magic pod was not afraid of ordinary fire like other swamp creatures. Its strange body that flickered with a metallic luster had a sturdy defense that was no weaker than well-tempered steel, but could not protect itself at all in the face of the terrifying golden flames. Spell penetration. That damned legendary fire wizard definitely had spell penetration in his law of fire. Otherwise, how could mere flames hurt its body? That's right, that fire wizard had also mastered the ability to make fire spells invisible. This was also a headache for the magic pod. Every time that fire wizard appeared in a certain area, there would be several burning fireballs and one or two powerful invisible spells attacking it. This forced the magic pod to desperately twist its body when it saw Grimm attacking it. It used vines and green branches to form an impenetrable defensive net around its body. If he was lucky, the rattan vines and vines that collided with each other would also trigger the invisibility spell in advance. In this way, the damage to the main body of the magic pod would be greatly reduced. After a few unsuccessful attacks, Ferentsen could not help but become furious. It roared, and the fungus giant's legs suddenly plunged into the stone floor. Then, its outstretched right tentacle crazily snaked forward like a rapidly growing vine. Grimm could not dodge in time, and his legs were entangled by it. Grimm raised his magic staff and cast a dozen fireballs to block the attacks of the magic pods. At the same time, he quickly transformed into a flaming giant. His entire body was wrapped in a layer of exploding golden flames. When Ferentsen's tentacle entangled Grimm, it was equivalent to entangling a thick pillar of fire that was more than 10 meters tall. While both sides were constantly competing, they were also madly hurting each other. As soon as the old vine tentacle was burnt to ashes, new vine tentacles grew out crazily and once again entangled Grimm's flaming body. While entangling, the front end of the vine tentacle kept digging and tearing at Grimm's body, as if it was looking for a gap to drill into his body. Surging golden flames gushed out of Grimm's body. If Ferentsen did not have a powerful regenerative ability, his right arm would have already turned into a pile of ashes. While Grimm was attacking Ferentsen with flames, his body was also infected with many green spots. This was the result of the enemy's terrifying poison. As expected of a grade 4 creature, its poison could even infect elemental flames. If Grimm's current physiological structure and elemental composition were not completely different from a human's, he would not be able to escape the inevitable fate of being poisoned to death. However, at this moment, the power of both sides was entangled. The power of fire and the power of poison were constantly colliding, devouring, and annihilating each other. The elemental damage caused by this was also very terrifying. If it were any other grade 4 creature, they would definitely not engage in such a mutually destructive magic attack. However, as a high-level slave of the magic pod, Ferentsen had obviously placed the safety of Grimm above his own. Taking advantage of the opportunity when Grimm was entangled by Ferentsen, the magic pod shook its body and formed a terrifying giant palm with its green branches. However, Grimm was able to dodge it with great difficulty. In the end, there was no way to hide anymore. Grimm's body exploded, leaving behind the part of his flaming body that was entangled by Ferentsen. The rest of his body flew away and reformed in another area. Although he managed to escape from Ferentsen's entanglement, Grimm had lost nearly 7% of his flaming body. Under normal circumstances, with the help of the Heart of Law, Grimm would only need a quarter of an hour to make up for this 7% loss. However, now that he was in the middle of a fierce battle, where could Grimm find this 7% loss? There was a dull thud. The magic pod's giant palm slammed down, turning the part of Grimm's body and Ferentsen's right arm into a puddle of sticky blood. Under the powerful sweep, the 7% of his flaming body was instantly destroyed, no longer existing. Grimm once again emerged from somewhere else. After reforming his body, it was obvious that the thickness of the golden flames around him had decreased by a thin layer. With Ferentsen's sacrifice, the magic pod was undoubtedly the happiest to achieve such a result. However, it did not know that the moment Grimm cut off his tail to escape, the small shadow he projected on the ground did not disappear with him, but instead quietly merged into the shadow under Ferentsen. The violent power of the three parties surged and reverberated in that narrow area, affecting Ferentsen's mental perception. Otherwise, with the mental power of a grade 4 powerhouse, all the minute changes in energy within 100 meters would not be able to escape his unobstructed mental perception. Ferentsen was only a grade 3 magic spore, but he was able to forcefully control a grade 4 fungus giant. Although such a parasitic combination gave it a powerful regenerative ability and a terrifying racial ability, it could not be compared to a genuine grade 4 powerhouse. At least, in terms of mental perception, Ferentsen was undoubtedly only at the grade 3 standard. Having lost a portion of his power, Grim could no longer act like before. He attacked unscrupulously. Grim moved with all his might, avoiding the magic pod's all-out attack and Ferentsen's strange vine entanglement. Hence, every time he appeared, there was a pitiful amount of time left for him to attack. If he hesitated or paused, he might be stopped by Ferentsen, who was rushing over frantically, and suffer a terrifying attack from the magic pod. Apart from his physical attack, the magic pod was also trying to separate and spread some parasitic spores that were hard to discern with the naked eye. Unfortunately, such an attack could not escape the detection and scanning of the AI chip. Just a small flame barrier was enough to block all the parasitic spores. All the spores were afraid of fire. As long as they got close to Grim, they would be incinerated by the invisible flame barrier. They could not even touch his body. It was precisely because these parasitic attacks were completely ineffective that the magic pod could only grit its teeth and use such a clumsy method to fight Grim. The two of them fought fiercely in the narrow hall, completely disregarding the terrifying damage their attacks would cause to their surroundings. Such unscrupulous actions ultimately brought an unimaginable calamity to the magic spore's sacred land. The earth trembled and the rocks crumbled. Layers of the underground palace collapsed under the violent shaking. Stone beams collapsed one after another, and passages and secret rooms were swallowed by the falling boulders. The entire magic spore's sacred land gradually turned into ruins in the fierce battle, along with the lives of hundreds and thousands of magic spore tribesmen. However, they did not care about the changes outside. The 3 grade 4 magicians were still fighting in the magic spore hall, doing their best to cause as much damage as possible to the enemy. Finally, with the delay of dodging the falling boulders, Grim's flaming body was once again confined in place by Ferentsen's vine tentacles. Seeing such a good opportunity to attack, the magic pod did not care if it would accidentally hurt Ferentsen. It immediately swung its thick body, and with a whistling wind, it madly attacked Grim. Chapter 12:16. The dark energy fluctuation disappeared in a flash. If it wasn't for the fact that the 3 people in the scene were all high-level combatants, it would have been easy for them to overlook this strange energy fluctuation in the midst of the chaotic and turbulent energy battle. This energy was dark and feminine, but it carried a terrifying aura that could cover the sky and cover the earth. However, what was truly terrifying was not this energy, but the owner of this energy. Almost at the same time the shadow energy erupted, a tall and blurry figure emerged from the back of Ferentsen's body. Sharp, blade-like metal claws frantically entered and exited his body. As the claws pierced into Ferentsen's body, a terrifying shadow energy would erupt. Such a small energy explosion not only severely damaged the body near the piercing point, but also left a dense mass of solidified dark energy in his body, contaminating most of his core organs. The dark figure quickly coiled around Ferentsen's body, the claws on its hands and feet constantly moving in and out of Ferentsen's body, instantly creating hundreds of bloody holes of different sizes. Shadow energy constantly exploded in the bloody holes, spraying out pitch-black blood and broken and twisted organ fragments. Ferentsen, who was using his body to imprison Grim, became the best target, the kind that could not fight back. It roared angrily, and its remaining arm also extended a terrifying whip-like tentacle, madly lashing at the mysterious enemy. However, it was a pity that its sluggish and rigid movements truly couldn't catch up to the other party's nimble and fleeting figure. The whizzing shadow of the whip landed on the empty ground, smashing the rock base that was as hard as steel into pieces and shattering the rocks. and just as he was struggling with all his might, the black shadow suddenly appeared behind Farnson's petite body. The sharp claws lightly pierced through the back of Farnson's head, and a large cloud of shadow energy instantly destroyed its brain and all of its consciousness. The level 3 magical spiridion that was parasitizing the level 4 fungus giant let out a shrill scream, and its soul instantly disappeared from the magical spore hall. Using himself as bait and cooperating with the shadow fiend to kill Farnson, Grimm also faced the terrifying palm of the demon pod. As soon as the holy light shield activated by Sodden's divine ring appeared, it was smashed into a sky full of fireflies by the giant palm formed by several green branches of the demon pod. Several lava shields and a dozen flame shields didn't even have the time to gather before they were smashed into pieces by the huge green palm. After crushing so many magic shields in one breath, even a magic pod's great strength could not stop the giant palm for a moment. Grimm made use of this delay to escape from the range of the giant palm by using the recoil force of the violent flames. An earth-shattering boom resounded. Grimm's fleeing figure was engulfed by the violent shockwave, and he could not help but stagger outwards. Meanwhile, the flame shield that he had barely put up crackled under the impact of the splashing rock fragments. Dazzling sparks and terrifying cracks could be seen everywhere on the light shield. Amidst the flying dust and gravel, a green vine that was 3 meters thick whizzed towards him. Grimm had no choice but to jump away without hesitation to avoid this ferocious attack. Just as the flaming figure appeared in an area, a strange cracking sound was heard. 3 big green mouths broke through the smoke and rushed over. They were like monsters with many heads opening their mouths and biting at him. Grimm raised his hand and unleashed a series of blazing fireballs. With the terrifying, explosive power of the flames, he was able to resist the invasion of the 3 green mouths. However, before he could stabilize himself, an evil gust of wind blew behind him, and another thick vine whipped towards him. Damn it, damn it, damn it. This demon pod's body was too huge. Once it became ruthless, its entire body was practically filled with its weapons of attack. The green vines that filled the air were 2 to 3 meters thick, and they were densely covered with terrifying wooden thorns that shone with a metallic luster. Even without considering the demon pod's terrifying 46 points of strength, being whipped by such vines was still a terrifying threat to Grimm. Apart from the vines, the leaves at the ends of the green branches that were as flexible as arms had curled up into green mouths. The mouths continuously spewed out terrifying green poisonous fog, and sticky and stinky saliva flowed down. When the saliva dripped onto the rocky floor, it would sizzle and smoke and would corrode tiny holes like a beehive. Poison attacks, corrosive attacks, multi-layered attacks, the demon pod seemed to have gone mad. It used its long, soft, and flexible stem to its fullest extent, and rained all kinds of attacks on Grimm's head like a violent storm. Grimm was forced to constantly teleport in the hall that was filled with falling rocks. He could not stay in any area for more than 3 seconds before he had to move. Otherwise, the terrifying roots that pierced through the ground, the thick vines that swept across the sky, and the creepy green mouse would come one after another, crushing Grimm's defensive spells into pieces. Grimm had also tried to wrap himself in flames to conceal himself. Unfortunately, before he could escape far away, he was once again hit by the green poisonous mist that sprayed towards him. The flames and the green poisonous fog clashed, and a large amount of the poisonous fog was vaporized, while Grimm's flames became green. However, just as the demon pod madly chased after Grimm, the shadow fiend that had concealed itself after killing Farnson showed itself again. The place where it appeared was none other than the stalk of the magic pod that was exposed outside the pile of bones and corpses. Flames exploded and shadows trembled. The shadow fiend floated out of the shadows and quickly appeared above the pile of corpses. The sharp blade in its hand pierced through the demon pod's force field and stabbed into the stalk that was 6 to 7 meters thick. The stalk broke, and green liquid sprayed out. The terrifying corrosive poison completely infected the Shadow Fiend from top to bottom. Poison attacks were ineffective. The corrosive attack had to face the Shadow Fiend's strong resistance to magic attacks with the Shadow Fiend's magic resistance. The corrosive poison would need at least 3 hours to corrode it into a pile of scrap metal. This amount of time was enough for the Shadow Fiend to torture it countless times. The demon pod reacted violently when its main body was suddenly attacked. It twisted its body violently, and 7 or 8 green mouths pounced on the Shadow Fiend from all directions, and its sharp teeth made a clicking sound. The Shadow Fiend had to run away after 2 rounds of attacks. Although it had a magic body and had outstanding physical and magic resistance, it was not confident that it could survive the demon pod's close-range attacks. When the Shadow Fiend returned to the shadows, the demon pod's attacks missed, and a series of exploding fireballs fell on the demon pod's body. Dong, dong, dong. A series of terrifying explosions blasted the demon pod stalk apart, and green liquid splashed everywhere. Even a green branch was ignited by the flames. The green mouth at the end of the branch twisted and struggled, and let out a shrill cry that sounded like a baby's. But such a cry could not save its life, and the green mouth turned into a pile of ashes in the shrill cry. "You damned bastards! I'm going to kill you all!" It was the demon pod's turn to be attacked from all sides. The Shadow Fiend and Grim were both slippery and cunning. The demon pod chased after Grim, and the Shadow Fiend snuck near the demon pod's main body to wreak havoc. The demon pod chased after the Shadow Fiend, and Grim used the powerful power of the Fire Wizard to cast fierce spells on the demon pod's body. No matter which one of the two attacks, it was still very, very injured. The demon pod's biggest weakness was that it was rooted on a pile of bones and could not move freely. That was why it could only chase after the Shadow Fiend and the Shadow Fiend, and it could not choose its own battlefield. Finally, the demon pod could not take it anymore after being harassed by Grim and the Shadow Fiend. It desperately waved its thick vines and green branches to chase away the 2 annoying fellows who were entangled around it like mosquitoes and flies. Then, with great difficulty, it pulled out its roots from the pile of bones and corpses. Due to the haste, it did not have the time to pull out its roots bit by bit, so the demon pod was moving in a way that was close to breaking apart. As the bones on top of the pile of bones continued to roll down, the sound of the roots breaking and tearing could be heard continuously. Large amounts of green and smelly juice gushed out from the broken roots, dyeing the top of the pile of corpses a wretched green. The dried bones of the wild beasts that were drenched in the juice softly collapsed like a baked cake, melting into a pool of disgusting green liquid. The moment the demon pod pulled out its roots and rose up, the pile of bones tumbled down, revealing a strange little well buried in the depths of the pile of corpses. The little well was clear, and at first glance, it gave off a strange feeling of endless life and surging waves. The demon pod's tens of thousands of roots were entangled around the little well, and it was covered by tens of thousands of corpses of swamp creatures. Therefore, the little well's aura did not leak out, and outsiders could not detect it at all. However, at this moment, when the demon pod could not bear the siege of the enemies and was about to rise up to fight back, Grim discovered the little well through the gaps between the corpses and the roots. The water of life was originally here. According to Amelia's information, the water of life definitely existed in the cave of the demon pod. But in the previous battle and search, Grim did not find any traces of the water of life. Just when he was suspicious, thinking that he had been deceived by someone, he found the target of this trip in the roots of the demon pod. Chapter 12:17. "Stop!" Grim shouted in a stern voice. "Hand over the life origin water, and I'll leave. This is still your world, dream on, you intruder." The demonic pod rubbed against the leaves and let out a strange voice. "I'll tear you to pieces and use your flesh to water my endless well. Then let's fight to the death." Grim was thoroughly infuriated by the demon pod's insubordination. He roared and transformed into a 10-meter-tall flame giant. His entire body was shrouded in soaring golden flames, and his hands were clenching huge fireballs that were churning with raging flames. Although the flaming giant was smaller than the demonic pod that was 300 to 400 meters long, its terrifying might that could burn the heavens and boil the seas surpassed the demonic pods. When Grim roared furiously, his eyes and mouth spewed out terrifying flames that were several meters long, making him look like the god of fire or the god of wrath. Even with the demonic pod's ruthlessness and arrogance, he could not help but tremble, his heart trembling. Soundlessly, energy boiled in the shadows behind the demonic pod, and the shadow devil's strange body slowly emerged from the darkness. Its scarlet mechanical eyes stared coldly at the demonic pod. It could be seen that once another battle broke out, the three of them would not rest until one of them died. They would fight to the death. Being pincered by the flaming giant Grim and the ghostly assassin-like shadow devil, the demonic pod felt uneasy, although it was 70% sure that it could deal with the two in front of it. 70% was only 70%. There was still a 30% chance that it would die under their pincer attack. For a grade 4 powerhouse with a long life force, a 30% chance of dying was high enough. This life origin water was formed after I extracted 20% of the water from the wetland swamp. It's also the guarantee that I can advance to grade 5. Don't even think about getting a single drop. The demonic pod shook its stem violently, its several hundred-meter-long body twisting like a snake. Although its tone was still cold and harsh, its attitude had clearly softened. We won't take away all of your life origin water. Just 1/3 of it will be enough. Grim raised the fireball with both hands and continued to maintain his terrifying pressure. As long as you hide here, those guys in the wetlands won't be able to chase you away. At that time, you will have plenty of ways to slowly collect water and life in the wetland. It will be much better than fighting with us here today. Bastards. You have no idea how difficult it is to collect water here. It took me more than 400 years to achieve what I have now, but you want to take 1/3 of it right off the bat. Delusion. This is a delusion. Then we only need 1/4, right? Don't tell me you think the two of us are worth less than 1/4 of the life origin water. No, there are too many. If I give you 1/4, I'll have problems increasing my own strength. Then 1/5. I can't go any lower. If you don't even agree to January 5th, then we'll have to. At this point, the blazing fireball in Grim's hand had turned from scarlet to golden. The violent flame energy contained in it was terrifying. Magic Pod did not reply. Instead, he used his sharp spiritual perception to secretly observe the changes in the two's expressions. Unfortunately, one of them had a magical mechanical body, and the other was the cunning Grim. Both of them were experts in bargaining, and it was not something a rookie like him could compare to. Finally, under the threat of extreme force, the three reluctantly came to an agreement. Grim took out close to 1 million magic crystals and a large number of resources unique to the sorcerer world to exchange for 1/5 of the life origin water from Magic Pod. His initial estimate was 750 grams, but Alice only needed 500 grams to save her life. Therefore, Grim still had 250 grams left to do some special research. If Grim had a small material plane, the 250 grams of life origin water would immediately create 2 or 3 rivers that stretched for thousands of kilometers and had abundant water in the small material plane. This was actually the true meaning of the life origin water. Outside of the Moseport sanctuary, the violent earthquake had lasted for half a day. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, the mountain range where the Moseport sanctuary was located collapsed with a terrifying rumble. The rising dust and rolling dust covered the entire mountain range. In a mushroom forest near the Spore Forest, 8 short Moseport people were standing on their tiptoes, hiding in a pile of moss and looking into the distance. They naturally saw everything that happened in the Moseport sanctuary. However, with their weak strength, they were obviously not strong enough to participate in such a terrifying battle. Uncle, is our choice right or wrong this time? After all, The princess has changed. Yes, Uncle Neru, the princess has become a human sorcerer. Well, will she still treat us like before? The shortest among the most poor people, the oldest one, gently stroked the roots under his chin that had already withered a little, and said faintly, "The fate of our most poor clan has always been like this, to always listen to the strong. After this battle, the most poor clan will definitely suffer a great change. If we continue to stay here, I'm afraid our fate will not be good." What about the princess? Has she gained a firm foothold in the other world? Can she protect us? A slightly younger, most poor person could not help but murmur. However, before Neru opened his mouth to answer, a clear male voice suddenly sounded behind them. If you still don't believe Amelia's guarantee, then you should believe the words of a grade 4 sorcerer. Hearing the voice of an outsider, the few most poor people were so scared that their faces turned pale. They looked back in fear. Only then did they realize that a human sorcerer in a red robe and holding a magic staff was standing behind them. And standing quietly beside the human sorcerer was the Princess Amelia, most poor, they kept mentioning. As for the inconspicuous Remy at the corner, no one cared about him at all. "Princess, you have finally escaped from the sacred place. We didn't meet Farnson there, did you? Thank God. You guys escaped really fast, or else you would not have escaped from Farnson's clutches. Look, when Farnson got angry, even the sacred mountain range was about to collapse." Listening to Neru's nagging, Amelia interrupted him in annoyance. "Neru, stop nagging there. Come and greet Master Grimm. He is my current master. Master just came out from the Moseport sacred place, and that Farnson was killed by him. Even the sacred mountain range was destroyed by him." Hearing Amelia's words, the few Moseport people could not help but suck in a breath of cold air. They looked at Grimm with eyes full of admiration and respect, especially when their gazes fell on the withered head hanging on Grimm's belt. Their expressions became even more horrified, and they seemed to be in a state of panic and anxiety. The human head, that was the head of the Moseport tribe's leader, Farnson. Although the head had withered and deformed, that strange skin color and those ferocious eyes were the Farnson that everyone was familiar with. With this human head as a witness, the few Moseport people no longer dared to doubt him. One by one, they knelt on the ground, not daring to look at Grimm's cold magical aura. "Stay here with him and wait for my return. Remy will protect you." Grimm did not even look at the Spore men. Instead, he ordered Amelia, "Master, don't we need to leave immediately?" Where are you going?" Amelia asked in surprise. "To collect the debt." Grimm gritted his teeth. "I still have a debt to collect here." After saying that, he left the mushroom forest without looking back. 2 days later, Sorcerer World, Tower of Destiny. A dense white light overflowed from the teleportation circle, and it lasted for a full quarter of an hour before the long-distance interplane teleportation was completed. When the white light slowly dissipated, Grimm, Amelia, Remy, and 8 strange figures of different heights appeared in the teleportation circle. "You're finally back. All right, did you bring back the water of life?" The little elf, Helen, who had been waiting worriedly in front of the teleportation array, quickly flew to Grimm and circled around him. Her shrill voice was trembling. Grimm did not speak, but took out a flat wooden pot from his belt. He shook it gently, and the sound of clear water could be heard. "It's good that you got it back. It's good that you got it back." Little Helen's voice was a little sobbing. Alice's life is almost exhausted. The time poison seems to be accelerating. "How do we use this thing?" Grimm asked solemnly. "Don't worry, leave it to us. All the necessary ritual items have been prepared, and we're just waiting for you to bring back the water of life. Let's go, we'll start now." After a while, the Tower of Destiny, which had been silent for a while, suddenly shone brightly. Milky white pillars of light pierced through the haze in the sky above Dragonbone Wasteland, attracting rays of starlight that looked like a poem or a dream. Following that, the mysterious and abstruse River of Destiny appeared above the Tower of Destiny, and countless bright stars fell from it, heading straight for the Tower of Destiny. At the moment when the stars fell, a tall and beautiful figure of a witch appeared. She opened her arms and allowed the stars to enter her body. As more and more stars fell, the beautiful witch's figure became more and more real. Chapter 12:18. Alice had returned to normal. It was as if she had been plotted against, and no one knew about it. At the very least, apart from a few people who knew the whole story, not many people knew about it. After being sealed for half a month, the Tower of Destiny had once again returned to the public eye. Unknowingly, the legendary fire Magus Grimm, the Blood Queen Mary, and the leader of the Witches of Destiny, Alice, had formed a small circle that shocked the world. Rank 4. 3 Rank 4 Magi. If they were placed among the 3 great Magus organizations, they would not be considered much. However, if they were placed among an unknown Magus family, it would be a little shocking. At the very least, after hearing the news of Mary's advancement, the entire Scatter Tower Forest was in a strange situation of being hot on the outside and cold on the inside. The small and mid-sized Magus families were extremely excited, believing that this was a sign that the Magi of the central continent were about to become stronger, as well as a sign that a powerful Magus was about to appear. The appearance of this powerful Magus would also change the situation of the central continent lacking a core, causing it to be in a state of disunity. However, in contrast to the fervent expectations of the low-ranked Magi, the high-ranked Magi had a different reaction. Since ancient times, the scattered Tower Forest region of the central continent had been dominated by Magus families, each managing their own territory. With this method, they had already resisted the invasion and infiltration of the 3 great Magus organizations, and had successfully continued this tradition for thousands of years. Now, a Crimson family had suddenly appeared in the Scattered Tower Forest Association, and they actually had 2 Grade 4 Magi. Moreover, what gave the other Grade 4 Magi a huge headache was that these 2 Grade 4 Magi were actually a couple. This was beyond what the Scattered Tower Forest Association could accept. It was not that the Scattered Tower Forest Association could not have a core, but it would be best if it did not appear while they were still alive. After all, the appearance of a core meant that resources, territory, and authority would be tilted. In this process, the current power structure of the Scattered Tower Forest would definitely undergo a heaven-shaking change. If all these things gathered towards the so-called core, the Scattered Tower Forest might have a huge influence similar to the 3 great Magus organizations. This was something that the high-ranked Magi did not want to see happen. First of all, the 3 major sorcerer organizations in the sorcerer world, the Silver Alliance, the Northern Witches, and the Sorcerer Association, would not allow it. It wasn't that the 3 major Magus organizations couldn't take over the Scattered Tower Forest region, but they were worried that in the process of invading, the local Magus families would resist fiercely, which would lead to damage to their own strength. In this way, he might have lost a few teeth, but it was possible that the other 2 competitors, who were also eyeing him covetously, would benefit from it. It was precisely because of this worry that the 3 great sorcerer organizations had secretly reached an agreement. They were not allowed to encroach on the central continent, and the Scattered Tower Forest region was their buffer zone. However, even if they did not invade, they would never allow another powerful wizard organization to appear in the Scattered Tower Forest. Therefore, once the core appeared, it would inevitably face all kinds of attacks from them, be it overt or covert. Secondly, not to mention the external forces, even the scattered forest of pagodas would not be willing to see the appearance of such a core. Even without the core, the Tier 4 sorcerers were still the kings and overlords of the regions they were in, monopolizing all the resources. However, once the core appeared, the resources, territories, and authority in their hands would definitely be invaded by the outside world. Rather than being a member of a large Magus organization and obeying the orders of a powerful Magus, it would be better to be the king of their own territory, living a carefree and unfettered life. Hence, the Tier 4 sorcerers in the Scattered Tower Forest were probably the group that most hated and did not want to see the core appear. Moreover, There was more than one Tier 4 sorcerer with the dream of the core. As a veteran Tier 4 magus, the chairman of the Scattered Tower Forest Association, Fred, had spent close to 1,000 years to create the current situation. Did he not want to turn the Scattered Tower Forest Association into a powerful organization similar to the three great sorcerer organizations? It was not that he did not want to, but it was really difficult to achieve. There were a total of 13 native Tier 4 sorcerers in the Central Continent, and they were all old fellows who had been tempered and nurtured for hundreds of years. Although there were strong and weak ones among them, it was almost impossible for the strong ones to completely suppress any one of them. This also meant that if any two Tier 4 sorcerers were to fight, it would be difficult to achieve a quick victory. The most likely outcome was that both sides would suffer, and the two sorcerer families would fall at the same time. It was precisely this balance of power that allowed the Central Continent to maintain a certain degree of balance. Fred had spent a great deal of effort to establish the Scattered Tower Forest Association, and he had even roped in Vice Chairman Merva. However, in reality, Merva was only slightly closer to him. If Fred wanted to start a rumbling high-ranked war and unify the Scattered Tower Forest region, it would be difficult to predict. At that time, whether Merva would still support him or to what extent she would support him. This was something that was hard to predict. It was precisely because this matter was extremely thorny, and the path to success was filled with thorns that Fred could only maintain a Scattered Tower Forest Association that seemed to work together on the surface. However, behind the scenes, the various Tier 4 sorcerers were still minding their own business, and it was impossible to coordinate and allocate high-ranked resources and the overall strength. However, under such circumstances, Grimm's appearance and the rise of the Crimson family had brought this ancient and terrifying problem back to the masses. Whether or not Grimm could become the so-called core, and whether or not he had the intention to become such a core, these questions needed to be answered. Hence, as the Crimson family flourished, all sorts of conspiracies and schemes came one after another, becoming a terrifying problem that troubled Grimm. Central Continent, Cadastran region. Ancient Blood Castle. The castle was located in the depths of a mountain range that was not very tall. There was only a winding forest path that led to Maple Town outside the mountain. The town had a population of nearly 1,000, and the basic facilities were basically complete. For a long time, the Vic family had occupied and ruled this territory, a rather ancient vampire family. Ancient Blood Castle was their residence, and the nearby Maple Town was their food that they had painstakingly reared and nurtured. However, in order to maintain their rule on the surface and not scare away their subjects because of the rumors of vampires, the Vic family restrained themselves from hunting for food. Unfortunately, in a Magus family war, the Vic family had been completely defeated. Not only had their blood lord died at the hands of the enemy, even the foundation of the Vic family had been destroyed by the enemy. All the hereditary territories belonging to the Vic family had fallen into the hands of outsiders. Only other vampire families could occupy the Vic family's territory so quickly. The ancient Blood Castle had changed hands 3 times before landing in the hands of the powerful Heinesen family. However, with Mary's sudden appearance, all the vampire families had to either move out of the Central Continent or obediently submit to Mary. Hence, after going around in circles for half a day, the ancient Blood Castle, which had once represented the pride of the Vic family, was offered to Mary by the Heinesen family. It became the most important stronghold of the Crimson family in the Central Continent. The eerie and terrifying ancient Blood Castle was formed from 5 castles of different styles. It had the dual functions of a noble castle and a military stronghold. The 4 small strongholds that were scattered around the castle did not consider comfort and leisure, instead focusing on defense. Hence, the strongholds were built extremely sturdy, and the entrances and windows were strangely narrow. Most of the passageways could barely allow a fully armed guard to pass through, and the core areas of the stronghold were densely packed with all sorts of hidden castles, secret passageways, and concealed shooting ports. The outer perimeter of the ancient Blood Castle sacrificed comfort and entertainment in exchange for a huge increase in physical defense. To put it bluntly, the ancient blood castle only needed 200 to 300 elite warriors to defend against the siege of thousands of enemies. The main body of the castle, which was protected by the 4 strongholds, was built beautifully and magnificently. The morbid temperament of the vampire race, which pursued perfection, elegance, and nobility, was undoubtedly on display in this building. If it wasn't for the fact that this place was far from the human world, and if it wasn't for the strange and sinister atmosphere, perhaps many visitors would treat this as a castle for nobles to relax and entertain themselves. The main hall on the 2nd floor of the castle was currently crowded with guests, and it was extraordinarily lively. Those who could move about here were naturally vampires dressed in exquisite noble attire. Most of the male vampires wore well-ironed tuxedos and red bow ties. They wore gentlemen's hats on their heads and held walking sticks in their hands. Below their noses were 2 delicate little mustaches. On the other hand, the female vampires were dressed in gorgeous one-piece dresses and colorful sun hats. Their wrists were covered with soft, thin silk gloves, and their feet were adorned with exquisite and small high heels. All of them were well-dressed and polite, displaying the cultured temperament and arrogant manners of human nobles to the fullest. It was a pity that in such an occasion, they were just minions and lackeys who listened to orders. The big shots who truly decided the future of the vampires were gathered in a secret room on the 3rd floor, and they were arguing intensely about something. With the strength of our vampire race, we can definitely establish a new Magus family. Lady Mary, do you think we should just break away from the Crimson family and use the ancient blood castle as our source? Chapter 1219. The vampire who died was from the Rother family. This was also a vampire family that had recently joined Mary's side. Although he wasn't the strongest individual in the family, with his grade 2 advanced rank, he could still occupy a good position among the vampires. However, such a person did not even have the chance to resist Mary and was killed instantly. All the high-ranking vampires present couldn't help but turn pale as they breathed in the thick stench of blood. They were so frightened that they began to scream. "All of you shut up." Mary sat on a high-backed wooden chair, her blood-red eyes sweeping across all the high-ranking blood breeds. She said coldly, "From today onwards, if anyone dares to suggest leaving the Crimson family, I will kill them without mercy." With that, Mary pointed at the puddle of blood on the ground. The purplish-black blood that had exploded all over the place gathered together like an image, forming the appearance of the grade 2 vampire. "Rather, he is one of yours. Tell me how to punish him." Mary's bloody eyes turned and stared coldly at the grade 3 vampire sitting on her left. "Ever since I chose to join your side, the so-called Rother family no longer exists. So, everything will be decided by your will." Facing Mary's terrifying blood sorcery, Rother could not help but shiver. She quickly stood up and bowed. To tell the truth, it was not surprising that he had killed the vampire. However, Mary's method of resurrecting this vampire was too strange and unimaginable. Since ancient times, it had been said among the blood breeds that high-ranking blood lords had unquestionable power over the lives of their vampires. At first, Rother thought that this was just a legend, but now, it seemed that this was a special blood ability that high-ranking blood lords had. A blood ability that targeted vampires under them. Thus, Rother, who was filled with fear, quickly expressed her stance. Her respect for Mary deepened. "You are indeed reasonable. All right, since this is his first offense, I will demote his title from Earl to Viscount. Allow him to redeem himself in the future." The basic title of a Tier 2 vampire was an Earl. Now that he had been demoted to a Viscount, it meant that he could only enjoy the resources and authority of a Tier 1 vampire within the family. Meanwhile, those who could enter the secret room today were Tier 2 Earls at the very least. Hence, after being demoted, the vampire could only dejectedly leave the room. In this small secret room, there were 1 rank 4, 7 rank 3, and 22 rank 2. This was also the result of most of the vampire families coming to join Mary after she became a level 4 blood wizard. In fact, the grade 2 vampire had spoken the thoughts of most of the high-ranking blood breeds. With such strength, he indeed had the qualifications to establish a new family that belonged to the vampires in the scattered Tower Forest region, where there were many experts. Unfortunately, no matter how excited they were, Mary, a tier 4 blood lord, remained unmoved. She used the most terrifying and brutal method to suppress this countercurrent. Considering the relationship between Mary and Grimm, although the vampires were unwilling, they could still accept it. As long as Lady Mary existed, the benefits of the blood breeds would still be maximized in the Crimson family. Some of the high-ranking blood breeds who had just joined were even secretly fantasizing that if Lady Mary could display her power and subdue the legendary fire wizard, the blood breeds would not have to leave their homeland. This way, not only would the vampires not have to leave their homeland, but they might even be able to take the opportunity to swallow up the Crimson family. Just as the eyes of the outsider blood breeds flickered and their thoughts wavered, the veteran blood breeds who had been following Mary for a long time smiled bitterly. Outsiders might still have other thoughts about the relationship between Mary and Grimm, but the Blood Knights and Blood Elves were well aware of it. These outsiders had miscalculated if they wanted to drive a wedge between the matriarch and the family master. They knew very well that their mistress was completely controlled by that legendary patriarch. The relationship between them was not something that could be shaken by a mere bit of resources and benefits. The three blood breed marquises, Soros, Isa, and Spara could not help but shake their heads when they saw how eager the outsiders were. They felt sorry for their foolishness. The old fox, Windler, who had been promoted to the pinnacle of Grade 2 by Mary's Bloodmaster authority, sneered as he twirled his beard. Right now, all of his power and ability came from Mary's grace. Unknowingly, he was also the most loyal and devoted to Mary among all the Blood Clan members. It was also Windler's idea for Mary to deal with the gibberish vampire with her thunderous might. While Mary intimidated the blood breeds with her terrifying might, she was also quietly conversing with Windler. Master, the current situation might be a plot by those old fellas. Old fellas? You mean the Grade 4 ones in the scattered Tower Forest? Yes. What did you notice? Before these vampire families pledged their allegiance to us, they were more or less oppressed by those Tier 4 forces, whether openly or secretly. To be honest, they were forced to join us because they had nowhere else to go. Isn't this a good thing for us? Mary was a little confused. Why would those old fellas be so kind? They might be kind, but it's more likely that they have evil intentions. Windler had a sinister smile on his face. They might not have expected the relationship between you and the master to be so strong, so they used the method of strengthening the strength of your subordinates to create conflict. Think about it. Lord Grimm is the master of the Crimson family, but the strongest branch of the Crimson family is under your leadership. This way, suspicions and misgivings will appear between you and Lord Grimm. What they are thinking now is also increasing the centrifugal force between you and Lord Grimm. Bastard, I was wondering why these blood breeds joined us so easily. So they had evil intentions. Let's see how I deal with them in the future. By the way, Master, what was that trick you just used? You could actually kill and resurrect a vampire out of thin air. How did you do that? It's a blood ability I obtained after advancing to Grade 4 Blood Wizard, Blood Symbiosis. This way, if any of my subordinates dies, I can temporarily preserve their souls and use the blood aura to create a new body for them. After hearing Mary's simple explanation, Windler's eyes suddenly lit up, and he became unusually excited. Master, if your blood ability can really do that, won't you be able to exhaust your enemies to death with your many blood-breed subordinates? It's not as simple as you think. Mary said coldly, low-level enemies might not be able to destroy souls, but those Grade 4 old fellas can definitely do it. If they destroy your souls, I won't be able to resurrect you even with my powerful blood ability. Windler furrowed his brows in deep thought and finally agreed with Mary's opinion. The methods of high-grade wizards were strange and unpredictable. It was too simple and crude to rely on ordinary human wave tactics to defeat them. But no matter what, blood symbiosis was still considered one of the more powerful blood abilities that Mary possessed. Master, since you don't want to let their plan continue, then let's find something for them to do. The old fox Windler laughed sinisterly. The 4 vampire families that came to join us have contributed a total of 5 small dimensions and a medium-sized dimension. Why don't we choose one of these dimensions as a whetstone to temper the entire blood tribe? Then let's choose that medium-sized dimension. Mary's charming and beautiful face revealed a trace of the pride of a high-grade blood wizard. Now, it's difficult to find anything that interests me in those small dimensions. Yes, I'll arrange it right away. Blazing Flame Monarch. It had been half a month since Grimm returned from the spirit realm. During this long period of time, he had been busy sorting out his recent gains. Water of Life, Water Spirit Jade, Meteorite Gem, Tree Demon's Heart of Wood, Mutated Mushrooms, Ogre War Hammer, Dripping Blood Spear, Feathered Serpent God's Corpse, Divine Force Crystal, Giant Egg. Among these many items, apart from the Tree Demon's Heart of Wood, which was a Grade 3 item, the rest were considered top-notch even among Grade 4 items or resources. However, Grimm had to spend some time thinking about how to deal with them. His first priority was naturally the mutated mushrooms. They all came from the swamp sage mode. After eating them for a long time, they would increase one's basic attributes by 1 to 2 points, and the side effects were minimal. Once these items were transplanted successfully, they would immediately become a strategic resource for the Crimson family. 1 to 2 points of improvement in aptitude might not mean much to low-grade wizards, but to high-grade wizards, it had a completely different meaning. It was not an exaggeration to say that it could turn the world upside down. Hence, as soon as he returned to the family, Grimm called Amelia over and asked her to lead a few demons poor people who had defected to him to choose a place to plant these mutated mushrooms. Because of this, the Crimson family even found an area similar to a swamp in the Alovis region, and designated an area with a radius of 100 miles as a forbidden zone, specifically set aside for a few demons poor people to experiment with. In view of Amelia's performance in the spirit realm, Grimm also gave her the Tree Demon's Heart of Wood. Amelia was a plant-type wizard, and the Tree Demon's Heart of Wood was a top-notch plant-type material. It was naturally suitable for making a convenient wizard staff. With the Tree Demon's Heart of Wood's help, Amelia's wizardry would definitely undergo a tremendous change. Chapter 1220. The meteorite gemstones that had appeared in history had all sorts of attributes, and there was no set rule. Hence, appraising a meteorite gemstone was like playing Russian roulette. Once the bets were made, the bets were placed on the size. No one knew what strange attributes a meteorite gemstone would have after it was appraised, and these attributes would undoubtedly affect the value of the meteorite gemstone. The meteorite gem that Grimm had obtained had a strange property. It was a cursed crystal. When a user attacks the enemy, there is a certain chance that the user would trigger the curse of the soul. The curse did not differentiate between friend and foe, and it ignored magic resistance. It was another cursed item that attacked indiscriminately. If Grimm wore this meteorite gemstone called the incantation crystal, it would trigger a curse when attacking an enemy. This curse would affect both the wielder and the target at the same time, which was why it was called an indiscriminate attack. Imagine hitting an enemy, and both sides would be affected at the same time. Such a painful scene would undoubtedly make the battle even more bizarre and dangerous. Hence, the moment Grimm appraised the incantation crystal, he had a look of hatred on his face and wanted to destroy it. However, after thinking about it, he could not help but feel relieved. This strange incantation crystal might not be suitable for him, but to some people, it was not inferior to a high-grade wizard weapon. For example, Mary. Mary was already a rank 4 blood wizard, and due to the nature of the vampires, she was innately immune to most curse-type spells. If this incantation crystal fell into Mary's hands, the curse would be ineffective against her, but would affect the spiritual senses of her enemies. In that case, What other grade 4 item would be more valuable than this? According to the AI chips analysis, the chance of triggering the incantation crystal's curse was 8%. This probability might be a little low for Grim, but for Mary, with her super agility attack frequency, this 8% probability was too high, not too low. Hence, Grim could only sigh and order someone to give this incantation crystal to Mary. The water spirit jade was a life-saving weapon, and Grim naturally had to keep it properly. The characteristics of the water of life were too strange. Even with the help of the AI chip, Grim's research progress was abnormally slow. He could only be patient and slowly plan. As for the strange warhammers he had taken from the ogre chieftain Gorfus, the AI chip had appraised that they were grade 4 weapons with decent attributes. It was unknown what material Golfus used to make this pair of warhammers, but they weighed 1,600 kilograms. Even with Grim's 28 points of strength, he couldn't swing it around, let alone use it in battle or use any offensive skills. From this, one could imagine how powerful Gorfus was and how strong his physique was. Gorfesh's Warhammer, Tier 4 weapon requirements, Strength 41, Constitution 38. Attack power, 760 to 980 degrees. Additional skills, Automatic Return, Berserk Swing, Whirlwind Attack. It had to be said that the pair of warhammers that Gorfus had used up all his resources to create for himself did have decent attack attributes. Grim could even vaguely see traces of laws in the skills attached to the warhammers. However, compared to the high-grade magic weapons produced in the Magus world, this pair of warhammers was still too simple and crude, especially that heinous 41 strength requirement, which directly blocked the majority of elemental wizards at the door. Only those pure physique-tempering magi and a few bloodline magi could meet the basic requirements to use this pair of warhammers. After checking the attributes of the warhammers, Grim could only regretfully place them in his collection. He would see if he could exchange them with other magi in the future and trade them away. If not, such a weapon with such stringent requirements could only be left to collect dust in his personal treasury. Dripping Blood Spear, Tier 4 weapon requirements, Troll Bloodline. Attack power, 600 to 780 degrees. Additional skills, Energy Projection, Split Attack Energy Projection. Uses the user's own strength to condense an energy spear and throw it out. It has close to 70% of the attack power of the Dripping Blood Spear. Frequency, Split Attack. The attack of the Dripping Blood Spear will automatically split after hitting the target, causing damage to other targets near the target. Number of splits, 3 times, decreasing in order, 30%, 50%, 70%. This Dripping Blood Spear was obtained from the small Heisenplane. It was a sacrificial item of the Troll tribe, and was also their divine weapon. Unfortunately, the one controlling it was only a Tier 3 Troll Witch Doctor, and he could not unleash even 1/10 of its power. That was why he was easily assassinated by the Shadow Fiend, and fell into Grim's hands. Unfortunately, this Tier 4 Dripping Blood Spear had even more stringent requirements. It could only be used by those with a Troll bloodline. As a result, it was a waste of its 2 powerful attack skills, yet it could not be used by Grim. Of course, if Grim was willing to spend some effort and use the Troll bloodline and skin to make a pair of gloves, he might be able to use this Dripping Blood Spear. However, Grim was a legendary fire wizard after all. If he did not use his magic staff and instead fought with a spear like a warrior, it would be a little too unprofessional. Therefore, Grim could only shake his head and sigh as he added the Dripping Blood Spear into his collection. This was actually the most common scene in the Otherworld conquest. Every plane had its own unique laws of the plane, as well as strange races that seemed right, but were actually not. Therefore, the equipment and weapons looted from them would definitely have special usage methods and restrictions. Therefore, if a high-grade wizard wanted to fully unleash his basic combat power, he would need to spend decades or even hundreds of years and a huge amount of resources before he could customize a real wizard tool for himself. Especially those Tier 4 wizard tools that were suitable for him, they were extremely rare. Take Grimm, for example. Although he had looted a large pile of Tier 4 items and weapons, after sifting through them, he had found very few weapons or equipment that truly matched his origin attributes. So far, he only had an ordinary flaming coral wizard staff. As for Sodden's divine ring, he could only use it by force. After all, he did not walk the path of a holy knight, so he could not unleash the true power of Sodden's divine ring. Among all the items, the only one that made his heart race was the divine fire orb. It was also the only magical creation that had the origin of fire, and it was almost completely compatible with his attributes. It was a pity that the divine fire orb had an owner. It would be a very difficult battle for Grimm to erase the divine force imprint that the god of fire had left within it. Apart from that, the Book of Wisdom was also something worth looking forward to. As the divine weapon of the god of wisdom, it had the mystical ability to strengthen the spiritual force of the host and provide large amounts of high-grade knowledge. Not to mention Grimm, perhaps all spellcasters would covet such a treasure like this. If Grimm could successfully subdue the divine fire orb and the Book of Wisdom, his strength would increase exponentially. The AI Chip had made some calculations before. With the might of a legendary fire wizard, the divine fire orb, and the Book of Wisdom, his battle prowess would be comparable to a peak rank 4 magus. If he had this kind of strength, he would be able to do whatever he wanted in the sorcerer world, not to mention the outer realm. No one would be able to do anything to him. The 3 great magus organizations definitely had fellows like him, but they were definitely busy cultivating in seclusion, hoping to break out of this world and become true immortals. There were even fewer fellows like Grimm, who had so much free time to create trouble and establish a magus organization. Hence, once Grimm had true battle prowess comparable to a powerful being, it would be much easier for him to gather the local organizations in the Forest of Pagodas. At least on the surface, no magus family or rank 4 magus would dare to go against the will of a powerful being. As for the few divine force crystals, they were also a very valuable magus resource. It was a pity that the winged serpent god was of the lightning attribute, so the divine force that formed the core of these divine force crystals was also of the lightning attribute. This was obviously incompatible with Grimm's elemental force. Of course, if Grimm were to forcefully fuse with the divine force crystals, he would be able to use them to gain some basic control over the lightning attribute. However, doing so would greatly reduce the true value of these divine force crystals, and most of the lightning divinity would go to waste. On the other hand, fusing with the lightning attribute instead of gaining control over the lightning attribute would also contaminate his own fire attribute. The gains did not make up for the losses. Even if he thought about it carefully, it was not worth it to kill the goose that laid the golden eggs. Since he could not use them for himself, he could only trade them away. The intermediate elemental magi with the lightning attribute would definitely fight over these divine force crystals like madmen. After all, if a rank 4 thunder magus absorbed these divine force crystals, he would only be able to improve his lightning affinity and grasp 1 or 2 unknown lightning attribute laws. However, if they fell into the hands of a rank 3 thunder magus, they would be able to grasp some lightning attribute laws in a single step. This way, their chances of advancing to rank 4 would increase by 20% to 30%. If they added in other supplementary resources, their chances of advancing to rank 4 would be at least 60% to 70%, even if it was not in the bag. With such a chance, no one would be able to stop themselves from laughing in their sleep. Even someone as open-minded as Grimm would be a little reluctant to trade such precious magus resources away. There were 1 or 2 famous rank 3 thunder magi in the central continent. If these things fell into their hands, the Crimson family would be creating a potential competitor for themselves in the future. Hence, most of the strategic magus resources in the hands of rank 4 forces would obediently be stored in their warehouses and would not be sold to the market. This was so that they would not create enemies for themselves. Since they could not use them, it was not suitable for them to be released should they just hide in the treasury and sleep. Chapter 1221. Arms the Thunder Dragon. As a Grade 3 Thunder Dragon that had joined Grimm's side in the middle of the war, Arms was young and powerful. However, ever since he allied himself with the humans, he had been completely ostracized by the dragons of Lance and could no longer mingle with them. On the other hand, Arms did not want to join the human magi either. Therefore, without anyone to rely on, it became a loner, a wandering ghost, guarding a huge territory, but living a muddle-headed life. It was said that the ambitious Emerald Dragon Redina had quarreled with him many times because of this, and a huge rift had formed between them. If the Crimson family could use some means to upgrade Arms to Tier 4, the addition of a Tier 4 dragon would elevate the Crimson family's overall strength to a whole new level. However, in terms of loyalty, Thunder Dragon Arms couldn't compare to Draconian Zacha. However, Zachary was only a Grade 2 Thunder Dragon, far weaker than Arms. Using Divine Force crystals on Zachary would definitely not be as effective. Moreover, Zachary was a pure-blooded dragon, while Zachary was a mixed-blood servant. The difference in strength between the two was even greater. After a moment of hesitation, Grimm finally contacted Arms, the romantic dragon in the distant plain of Lance. A magic screen slowly opened up, showing a strange scene on the other side. The other side of the screen was a cave on a high mountain. Through the screen, Grimm saw Arms, whom he had not seen for a long time. His scales were still as dazzling as ever, his claws, teeth, and horns as sharp as ever. His body was still as imposing as ever, but he seemed to be extremely dispirited. He lay lazily on the stone floor, and even when he raised his head to greet Grimm, he seemed to have no energy left in him. "What happened to you?" Grimm could not help but hesitate. "Redina wants to leave me." A pained expression appeared on Arms' long and narrow face. "She thinks I'm useless. She hates me for being laughed at by the other dragons. She hates me for not being able to build a magnificent dragon cliff for her. She wants to leave me." Grimm's face was filled with shock. He really didn't expect to see a dejected giant dragon hiding in its nest, secretly crying and blaming itself in his lifetime. In the eyes of the ignorant commoners, he was a powerful and enviable being, a great lord. However, this was also good. The worse the other party's situation was, the more they needed his help, and the easier the negotiation would be. Grimm wasn't someone who liked to talk nonsense. He pointed a finger at the screen, and it focused on a pile of strange crystals that shone with a faint blue luster in front of him. On the other side of the light barrier, Lightning Dragon Arms' eyes immediately widened, and it crawled up from the ground before making its way over to the light barrier and sniffing with all its might. "The smell of the laws. I can smell the law of lightning from them. This is the crystallization of divine power. Where did you get them?" Arm's spirit was immediately roused, and his huge dragon eyes shone with expectation. He put on a servile look, as if he was trying to please Gushijio, but was afraid that he would say something wrong. "Don't worry about where they came from. Let me ask you, are they useful to you?" "Yes, they're useful. They're definitely useful." Arms immediately roared. "With these crystallization of divine power and the resources I've collected over the years, reaching Grade 4 in 200 years won't be a problem." Sure enough, the lifespan of the dragon race was extremely long. Even a natural advancement would easily take 1 or 200 years. Perhaps by the time it successfully advanced to level 4, the weaker level 1 sorcerers in the sorcerer world would have already been replaced. 200 years. Grimm was speechless. This was the first time he experienced how difficult it was for a dragon to advance. The rules of the world were still fair. Dragons had strong bodies, outstanding magic resistance, great divine power, powerful spellcasting ability, and unparalleled melee ability. They had so much, but they also had to lose something. It was extremely difficult for them to grow stronger, and it was even more difficult for them to reproduce. It was precisely these two factors that limited the number of the dragon race, preventing them from overflowing and becoming a destroyer that broke the balance of the world. "Master, I've signed a mutual aid contract with you. I'm completely worthy of your trust. You You see, these crystallization of divine power. Grimm's face was expressionless. We did sign a mutual aid contract. But once you reach grade 4, your spiritual force will definitely be stronger than mine. Will this contract still be able to restrict you? How do you think I should trust you? Master, I'm already a member of your family. Don't you trust me? Besides, there's someone else in the family with this lightning element. Arms was halfway through his sentence when he saw the image of a dragon man Grimm had conjured with his flames. Arms immediately closed his eyes in pain, but he was still struggling. Master, Zacha is only grade 2. Even with the help of these crystallization of divine power, it'll still be difficult for him to reach grade 4. Besides, dragonmen can't be compared to real dragons in any other aspect except for their melee ability and some insignificant elemental spells. The light screen in front of him changed again, and a huge corpse of a divine creature that contained traces of holy aura appeared. Looking at the corpse that was still filled with a majestic aura and sensing the wisps of holy aura, Arm's words came to an abrupt halt, and he fell into a state of despair and sluggishness. What did Grimm do? How did he get the corpse of a divine creature? Judging from the corpse's completeness and the strength of its aura, he was definitely a terrifying creature at the peak of grade 4 when he was alive. As long as Grimm threw caution to the wind, with the corpse of this divine creature and the crystallization of divine power, even if Zacha's aptitude and talent were poor, he would still be able to reach grade 4. This time, he no longer had any leeway to bargain with Grimm. Arm's face revealed a pained expression. After dealing with Grimm for so many years, he naturally knew what he wanted. But to hand over his freedom and life to Grimm for a trifling bit of crystallization of divine power, this made him feel a little pained and unwilling. However, he also knew that if he missed this opportunity, it would be extremely difficult for him to obtain these trifling bits of crystallization of divine power. It might even be impossible. If he led a team of dragons to plunder other planes, he would not be able to obtain such crystals. If he chose to follow those grade 4 dragons to plunder other planes, even if he obtained such spoils of war, they would only belong to the great dragon lords. He would not be able to lay a finger on them. Hence, this level of crystallization of divine power that was completely compatible with his origin was something that could only be found by chance. If he missed this opportunity, he would regret it for the next 10,000 years. After struggling in pain for a moment, Arms finally raised his head and stared at Grimm with his pale blue eyes. He said word by word, "Give me the corpse and the crystallization of divine power, and I'll sign a dragon's soul contract with you." Ordinary dragon contracts already had a lot of restraints on dragons, and a contract that used a dragon soul as a template was even more terrifying. Such a contract was equivalent to the giant dragon handing over its life to an outsider. With just a thought, the outsider could decide its life or death. This, to the proud and arrogant pure-blooded dragons, this was simply unimaginable. Grimm raised an eyebrow, but his expression remained calm. "I'll give you half of the corpse at most. I have other uses for the other half. I can't give it all to you." The struggle on Arm's face made him look a little sinister. "Half it is then, but I want a real dragon cliff." "That's not a problem. I want the best." Arms snorted a thick black smoke out of his nostrils. "I want the best," he growled. "That's even more of a problem. I can order the Gargamel to open the treasury of the family and build you the largest, most luxurious, and most jeweled dragon cliff in Lance. I guarantee you'll become the brightest star among the grade 4 dragons." Hearing Grimm's promise, Arms felt a little better. With the divine force crystal, his control over the law of lightning would undoubtedly reach a whole new level. With that half of the god's corpse, its lightning dragon bloodline would undoubtedly be greatly nourished. At that time, not to mention advancing to the 4th order, even advancing to the 5th order would have a slight possibility of advancing. Arms had another thought hidden in the depths of his heart. If he could reach grade 5 before Grimm, the Dragon Soul contract would no longer be invulnerable. If it was any other wizard, they would definitely not be willing to give the corpse of a grade 4 god to an outsider. As long as they used certain methods, they could transfer the special immortal properties of the corpse to their own bodies. However, Grimm was an elemental wizard, so his desire for an immortal body was not as strong as that of a body refinement wizard. As for why he forcefully snatched half of the corpse from Arm's mouth, it was not for himself, but for an elder of the Crimson family who was worth investing in. Perhaps when that fellow grew stronger, he would be able to surprise him. Chapter 12:22. Bliss' life was abnormally gloomy. Ever since he'd made up his mind to transform into an insect, his thoughts, his preferences, his sense of beauty, and his life had all changed drastically. Good food and wine, beautiful young ladies, charming noble women, extraordinary power. None of this could attract him. The meaning of his life had been changed beyond recognition by the evil and twisted insect queen. Other than the warm, high-energy flesh, he had lost all interest in anything else. His uniqueness made the insect Lich Bliss the most unique person in the Crimson family. He carried out his family's missions independently, sneaked into the dark forest alone, and lived alone in a hidden residence. Even though he was in his family's wizard pagoda, Bliss was usually alone and almost never had any contact with outsiders. Even so, the insect Lich Bliss' terrifying reputation spread far and wide. His hideous and ugly insect body, his ferocious and brutal insect army, and his elusive movements. All of this caused others to be even more curious and fearful of him. As an old core magus of the Crimson family, Bliss's battle prowess was undoubtedly one of the best among the level 2 magi. He'd even become the core of the Crimson family's war effort. But with the rise of the Crimson family and the emergence of large numbers of high-level magi, the family's core battle prowess rose from level 2 to level 3 and even showed signs of reaching level 4. Under these circumstances, the insect Lich Bliss, who'd used up all of his potential, gradually began to fall behind. First, there were a few level 3 vampires under Mary. Following that, even Meryl, who'd had 0 battle prowess, magically transformed into a red dragon witch. Beginner level 2, intermediate level 2, high level 2. Meryl quickly improved and was now at the peak of level 2, showing signs of leaping to level 3. Apart from that, many of the weak fellows in the family that Bliss had looked down on had also soared, showing signs of surpassing him. Such a situation happened again and again, and it naturally deeply agitated Bliss. For himself, for the restless insect heart that could not be suppressed, Bliss had secretly visited Grimm, hoping to obtain an opportunity to continue improving. It was a pity that after becoming a Tier 4 Magus, Grimm had been too busy. He was so busy that he didn't even have the time to think about the bitterly waiting Tier 2 Insect Shaman. He had just returned from the depths of the Black Forest and expanded his insect army on a small scale. The current insect witch Bliss had the strength of a Grade 2 advanced, and the insect army under him was even more terrifying. There were now more than 20 Grade 2 Void Marauders and over 100 Grade 1 advanced Invisible Mantises. As for the bug army that he could command, their numbers were in the thousands. If it wasn't for his weak spirit limiting the number of bug armies, he could even turn a small human kingdom into a swarm of bugs that would obey his orders. After returning to the family encampment, Bliss hid in his own residence. He had no sorcerer apprentices, nor did he have any enlightenment missions. Apart from missions and residences, he never participated in the family's internal communication activities, and it was even more impossible for him to appear in those crowded and luxurious banquets. To put it bluntly, in Blitz's heart, becoming stronger and evolving was the only meaning of his life. But this time, before he could sink into a dull silence, a bright flame rune appeared in front of him with a crackling sound and quietly floated there. Looking at the strange flame rune that represented Grimm, Bliss' mind suddenly turned upside down. Although he didn't know why Grimm had summoned him, a trace of hope suddenly appeared in the depths of his heart. After hesitating for a moment, he finally reached out with his strange insect hand and pressed it on the flame rune that was quietly burning. The strange rune was clearly burning with golden flames, but when Bliss's insect hand touched it, he didn't feel the slightest burning sensation. The golden flames expanded with a whoosh, quickly spreading from the rune to his arm, and then to his entire body. Just as Bliss was feeling puzzled, the golden flames suddenly swayed before his eyes, and the space around him trembled. When he regained consciousness and regained his senses, he discovered that the golden flames had completely dissipated, and he was now in a spacious and large hall of flames. Grim stood silently at the top of the hall, his black pupils staring at him without blinking. This was the blazing flame monarch. Bliss immediately understood. At that moment, this legendary patriarch had used some kind of mysterious spell to forcefully pull him from the Crimson family's encampment tens of thousands of miles away to this place. Blitz's strange insectoid compound eyes only glanced at Grim for a moment before hurriedly moving away. Even though Grim had not forced out the might of the flames, Bliss still felt a stinging pain in his insect eyes, as though he was being burned by the flames. The moment this feeling appeared, Bliss could not help but feel a sense of desolation. Once upon a time, he was a capable fighter that followed Grim around. And now, even looking directly at Grim's radiance would cause him to suffer quite a bit of backlash. The disparity in strength revealed by this caused him to feel depressed. "Bliss, do you know why I called you here today?" Grim's voice was clear and melodious. His words lingered in the hall, faintly resonating with the environment. "I don't know. Please enlighten me, Patriarch." Bliss hurriedly bowed, looking fearful. "Take a look at what this is." Grim's staff shook, and a crack appeared in the air at the center of the hall. Half of a powerful creature's corpse floated out. Blitz swallowed his saliva with difficulty as he stared at the light green scales, the white wings, and the terrifying majesty that lingered even after its death. His green insectoid compound eyes stared unblinkingly at the corpse of this strange monster. An irrepressible voice roared in the depths of his heart. "Devour it! Devour it! Devour it!" This was the corpse of a high-ranked creature. Even though it had been split in half, the strange feeling of looking down on all life and dominating the world did not diminish at all. Looking at the corpse, Bliss was guessing frantically. Was it grade 4 or grade 5? The exceedingly powerful and cryptic power still lingered in the corpse, intimidating those who had ill intentions towards it. However, no matter how powerful the power was, an inanimate object was still an inanimate object. Everyone could sense the sadness of its death. "My lord, this is..." Bliss's heart was beating wildly, but he did his best to suppress the restlessness in his heart. He became even more respectful. "This is the spoil of war our family brought back from the Hyzen Plain. It was the only native god of the Hyzen Plain. It was originally grade 5, but due to some special reasons, it fell to grade 4. That's why we killed it," Grim said calmly as he looked at the spoil of war. "I called you here to ask you something. If I'll let you devour this half of the god's corpse, what level can you reach?" Bliss's consciousness immediately scattered, as if he had been struck by a bolt from the blue. After a full quarter of an hour, he tried his best to gather his thoughts and regain his consciousness. "Sir, since this god's corpse had once reached the 5th stage, it already possessed an immortal body. If I can devour it, my innate potential will rise from the peak of grade 2 to grade 4. At that time, my chances of advancing to grade 3 will be 100%, and my chances of advancing to grade 4 will be 60%. Grim listened silently, and combined with the AI chip's senses, he agreed with Bliss' judgment. Bliss' biggest problem was not with himself, but with the insect queen that had fused with him. The insect queen's potential was once at the mid-grade 3, but it had been forced to reverse its fusion with Endic, causing its potential to fall to the peak of grade 2. Now that it had half a divine corpse that was between grade 4 and 5, it could raise its potential once again. This was within the AI chip's calculations. Grim had originally planned to ask the Witches of Death for help to turn this corpse into a high-grade grade 4 undead creature. However, according to the AI Chip's calculations. How could a grade 4 undead creature compare to two future subordinates? This was why Grimm had opened up his treasury, intending to use these resources to create a batch of loyal and reliable high-rank fighters for the Crimson family. Although this insect, which, Bliss, wasn't as powerful as lightning dragon arms in terms of individual combat prowess, his unique insect-repelling methods and peculiar combat techniques were often able to unleash unexpected results. If it was any other grade 4 Magus, they would not dare to waste resources on their subordinates before they were certain of advancing. Only Grimm had absolute confidence in himself and dared to use so many resources at the initial stage of level 4 to create so many subordinates with the potential of level 4 for the Crimson family in one go. Although it was a waste to give half a divine corpse to Bliss, who was only a grade 2 insect, it was not a big deal if he considered the future of the Crimson family. Grimm had used the Dragon Soul contract to control arms. However, before Grimm could come up with a reliable method to deal with the insect lich, Bliss had already contributed a plan in a hurry. Blood Soul plus Curse of the Barbarian, which, at higher levels, the only effective methods of control were often related to the soul. Bliss Blood Soul and Barbarian Witch's Curse was a combination of these two soul control methods. From this point, it seemed that Bliss did not mind having his soul controlled by an outsider. Grimm's journey had been smooth sailing, and he could not understand the despair and agony Bliss felt when he had no way to advance. Without Grimm's help, Bliss would never be able to find a way out by himself. The resources or items that could solve his problems were not something he could reach at his current rank. Rather than being stuck at a grade 2 and slowly waiting for death, he might as well show his worth and become a loyal subordinate of a powerful magus like Grimm. In order to gain his trust, he had to hand over his soul and show his loyalty. Hence, it was not Grimm who was thinking about how to control Bliss, but Bliss who was frantically offering himself in exchange for Grimm's favor. Chapter 1223. Grimm could finally heave a sigh of relief after distributing most of his top-notch resources in one go. He wanted to make use of this opportunity to settle down a little. The Crimson family needed time to grow, and so did he. Time was always on his side. Thus, Grimm, who had returned to the Blazing Flame Monarch, once again disappeared from everyone's sight. This time, it would take him a long 80 years to settle down. Blazing Flame Monarch Level 5. Through the expansion of various wizard techniques, the interior of the Blazing Flame Monarch, which had originally been a small wizard's pagoda, had changed quite a bit. If the Blazing Flame Monarch was to be the Crimson family's base of development, it would be too small, unable to accommodate the increasing number of wizards in the family. But to seal it into a sealed space for only Grimm's use, the space inside would be so vast that it would be terrifying. In a vast fifth floor, apart from a dozen magical machines that were responsible for cleaning and guarding, only Grimm and a Shadow Fiend were allowed to roam around. Even Mary, who had extremely high authority, would only visit once every few days, and her activities were mostly concentrated in Grimm's residence on the 4th level of the Wizard's Pagoda. As for Alice, who also had extremely high authority, she never stepped foot into the Blazing Flame Monarch, spending her days in the Tower of Destiny cultivating and strengthening the Witches of Destiny. Even if Grimm had some intimate words he wanted to say to Alice, he could only condescend to look for her in the Tower of Destiny. One morning, the door to his residence suddenly opened. Grimm stretched his aching waist and massaged his slightly trembling legs, a tired expression on his face as he moved out of the open steel door. Behind him, the luxurious bedroom had been reduced to a mess. The exquisite bed made of purple pear wood had become a pile of rubble, its shape and outline no longer visible. It was as if a terrible typhoon had passed through the entire bedroom. Broken decorations and household furnishings were everywhere. Amidst the ruins, Mary's dazzling, fair body was revealed in all its glory. Even if she was still in a deep sleep, those inconceivably soft and beautiful curves, those cheeks that were soaked with a soul-stirring blush, and those fair and smooth skin that sparkled with a translucent luster still possessed an endless charm. The battle last night was too intense, and both of them did not restrain their strength well. That was why every time he and Mary had sex, it was no less than an intense hand-to-hand fight. In the midst of surging emotions, excess energy was released. How could these ordinary household furnishings withstand the brute force of two rank 4 magi? Even after reaching Tier 4, Grimm's basic physique remained at around 30 points. It was incredibly difficult for him to improve further. If it wasn't for the mushrooms he brought back from the spirit realm that increased his physique by 2 points, he would probably still be at 28 points. Meanwhile, after reaching Tier 4, Mary's physique had improved rapidly. Now, she had 24 points. In the eyes of mortals, 24 points of physique was a magnificent physique that only those legendary powerful demons or monsters could possess. It was precisely because of the rapid increase in physique that the battle between the two of them became longer and more difficult. In the end, after 17 hours and 36 minutes of killing and hand-to-hand combat, Grimm finally won the battle with his slightly higher physique and the advantage of being a male. However, when he stepped out of the house, his steps were already a little shaky, and he could not even straighten his back. Grimm dragged his aching muscles through a tunnel and arrived at a brightly lit hall. Here, on the bright and clean floor, a huge long table was placed in the middle of the hall, filled with all kinds of delicacies and drinks. At one end of the long table, there was a strange high-backed stone chair, and on both sides of the table, there were 4 beautiful girls with graceful and delicate figures quietly waiting there. Their skin was black and glossy, and their soft and slender bodies seemed weak, but they were filled with explosive power. However, through the sparse clothing, one could vaguely see traces of magic imprints on their bodies. They were also a member of a large elven race, a strange branch of the High Elves called the Night Elves. Grimm's muscular body was only covered in a thin robe, the long tail of the robe dragging on the ground. He was barefooted, and his dark red hair hung loosely behind him. His entire being was filled with an arrogant and unruly aura. Upon seeing Grimm's arrival, the night elf ladies who had been bowing and waiting by the dining table hurriedly pulled out the heavy stone chair and helped him to take a seat. Then, they nimbly placed plates of delicacies in front of him. The dark elf girl serving Grimm was a Tier 2 elf at the very least. At the very least, she would be a famous elf powerhouse in the outside world. But here, they could only play the role of weak maids, serving their only master with all their might. Ever since they were sold into the Wizard's Pagoda, they had become lifelong prisoners in this giant prison. The secrets of the tower, the habits of the wizards, the defense mechanisms of the Wizard's Pagoda, these were all secrets that could not be leaked. As servants of the Wizard's Pagoda, it was impossible for them to leave this place until the moment of true death. The reason why he had bought this batch of servants was because they were pleasing to the eye and also to take care of his daily life. As a high-level wizard, Grimm spent most of his energy on the Wizard's Spell Lab, the Alchemy Lab, and the few divine weapons sealed in another dimension. Naturally, he did not have the time to take care of his daily life, such as food and toiletries. These were naturally taken care of by the servants of the Wizard's Pagoda. After all, Grimm was a level 4 wizard. His every action and breath carried an indescribably powerful elemental tide. Wherever he stopped or passed by, there would be terrifying elemental energy radiation left behind. Ordinary human maids would die painfully from the excessive elemental energy radiation if they stayed in such an environment for a long time. Only these maids with some extraordinary abilities could survive longer. Thus, most of the private Wizard's Pagoda would periodically purchase or capture a batch of high-quality female servants of the Wizard's Pagoda, using them as consumables. In comparison, Grimm had given them some fire resistance amulets and used the energy of the Wizard's Pagoda to create a living environment similar to his home in the slave quarters on the 2nd level. These acts of kindness were rare and commendable. Grimm sat upright on a stone chair. He used his knife and fork to quickly cut up the ribs of the fire dragon and put them into his mouth. After chewing with a crunching sound, he swallowed them. Even though the maids had prepared a variety of delicacies for Grimm, he still preferred the original taste of the fire dragon ribs that had not gone through any complicated cooking processes. Dragon meat, tendons, bones, marrow. These things were either extremely tough or contained an unimaginable amount of fire element. If Grimm had swallowed the fire dragon's ribs instead of an outsider, he would have painfully discovered that the dragon's meat was so tough that it was comparable to enchanted leather armor. No matter how hard he ground his teeth, he might not even be able to tear off a small piece of meat from the dragon's meat. The tendons wrapped around the dragon meat were even more despairing. If his teeth were not strong enough, he would not be able to bite through them. As for the fire dragon ribs wrapped around the dragon meat, it would be impossible to damage them without a level 2 sharpening spell. Only a high-level wizard like Grimm, with his powerful physique and terrifying strength, coupled with the support of appropriate spells, could bite and swallow the fire dragon ribs so easily. As for the other food, even though they tasted more exquisite and delicious than the fire dragon ribs, the energy contained in them was worlds apart. Grimm, who was exhausted, would need to eat at least 100 kilograms of normal food to replenish the energy in his body. At their level, the primitive eating and digestive system of humans was so inefficient and troublesome. It was much simpler and more efficient to consume the energy crystals directly than to eat the energy crystals according to human habits. However, in order to maintain the thin connection between humans and magi, high-ranked magi had to maintain their human form and some human etiquette. While Grimm gritted his teeth and used all his strength to deal with the fire dragon ribs, a slender female night elf attendant with a perfect demeanor stood by the table and reported the situation of the resources in the tower with a clear and melodious voice. There are only 5 tons of fire dragon ribs left. I've already informed Lord Gargamel and asked him to find a way to capture a rank 3 fire dragon and lance. There are less than 3 sets of furniture stored in the tower. I would like to ask for your opinion, sir. Should the furnishings in your residence be changed to obsidian in the future? Otherwise, the frequency of damage is too high. Lady Merrill recently sent over an abyss succubus. She's only slightly more than 300 years old, which is equivalent to a 7-year-old human girl. She's currently enjoying herself in the lower levels of the tower. Do you have the time to appreciate her? Grimm was stuffing his mouth full of dragon meat. His cheeks were sore from chewing, and he paid no attention to the female attendant's report. Finally, he swallowed the dragon meat with great difficulty and picked up the wine on the table, downing a large cup before patting his chest to calm down. A succubus. I've seen an abyssal creature like this when I was an acolyte. She's a rare beauty. Why? Where did Merrill buy it from? I heard from Lady Merrill that this abyssal succubus came from the Steel City of the Outlands. She's been asking to see you for a long time, and seems to have a special purpose for coming here. Outlands. Abyss. Chapter 1224. The Abyssal World was also known as the home of the demons. It protected the demons, as the demons represented its evil and twisted source. Almost all the demons in the Abyssal World were formed after evil souls or thoughts were contaminated by the will of the Abyss. Other than the commonly seen demons in the Abyssal World, there were also other evil creatures, including demon hunter spiders, Bodar corpses, demon hunter spiders, various undead creatures, traitorous demons, twisted mortals, and even worse existences. Those that could survive in the Abyssal World were all powerful and evil lunatics, without exception. But among the many ugly, evil, and chaotic demon creatures, the succubus was undoubtedly the most popular. They had beautiful faces and sexy bodies, and were born with the genes to obey the strong. They were willing to use all methods and techniques to charm and please their masters. Thus, many high-level wizards kept some abyssal succubi that were accidentally captured in their private wizard pagodas. But even though the abyssal succubi looked sexy, alluring, and bewitching, their nature was still so evil, cruel, twisted, and chaotic. Once they grasped a person's weakness, they could step on you mercilessly in the next moment and let you experience the cruelty and evil of the demons. And such an abyssal succubus had taken the initiative to meet Grimm. Even with Grimm's intelligence, he could not figure out the meaning behind it. Grimm received the strange succubus in the Hall of Flames on the second floor of the tower. When the succubus slowly walked in, Grimm squinted his eyes and silently sized her up. Her white skin was smooth, and only a few tiny purple spots could be seen on her upper arms. Her bright red lips were like burning flames, and her tall nose and red eyes made her look petite and cute. It was easy to evoke the protective feelings deep in the hearts of male creatures. Succubi did not have the habit of wearing armor. Most of her delicate skin was exposed, and only the important parts were covered with a layer of fine, dark scales. The distribution of these scales was very artistic and could only cover the top of the giant ball of flesh and the dark region between her legs. Rather than saying that these scales were for protection, it was more of a different kind of temptation. However, the huge, dark red bat wings on the back of the succubus, the flexible hook tail with a cuticle, the huge curved demon horns on her head, and the naked hooves all indicated her demon identity. It also brought a different kind of stimulation to all the male creatures. Even in the face of a domineering level 4 fire wizard like Grimm, this young succubus did not show any fear. Instead, she took the opportunity to show off her enchanting figure and hot body. "Tell me, which abyssal lord do you belong to? Why are you here to meet me?" Grimm squinted his eyes, a dangerous glint flashing in his black pupils. His majestic and abundant spiritual pressure filled the entire Hall of Flames. As his emotions changed slightly, the aura of flames in the hall fluctuated continuously, showing signs of turning into a flaming storm at any time. The entire Wizard's Pagoda was Grimm's private territory, and the hall was naturally filled with his thick aura of flames. In the world of flames, Grimm was the master. In this territory that belonged to him, any change in Grimm's emotions would cause the fire elemental energy to tremble, which would cause terrifying natural disasters. How could a mere Tier 1 succubus withstand the mental pressure of a Tier 4 legendary fire wizard? She was so frightened that her face turned pale. She hugged her chest and collapsed on the warm floor, trembling. Even though she was frightened by Grimm's terrifying aura, her every move was still enchanting. Furthermore, the way she crossed her arms in front of her chest highlighted the pair of huge meatballs that were trembling incessantly. Her petite and adorable appearance made people want to take pity on her. "Humph, little fellow, this trick of yours is useless against me." Grimm laughed coldly. With a wave of his hand, a giant flaming hand appeared and hovered above the little succubus's head, as if about to slap her to death. "Tell me your purpose as soon as possible, or else." The little succubus was truly terrified this time, and she hurriedly shouted at the top of her lungs, "Esteemed Lord Grimm, I'm a subordinate of Prince Hroibelik. It's Lord Zoyard who asked me to meet you, Hroibelik." Zoyard. Grimm waved his hand to disperse the giant flaming hand, and could not help but mutter to himself. Why did these two names sound so familiar? After all, wizards had spiritual power that far exceeded that of ordinary people. Retentive memory and super-fast calculation were child's play to them. Grimm still had some impression of these two names that he had heard 100 years ago. However, before he could recall them, the AI chip had already retrieved some memories related to these two names and projected them into his mind. Zoyard was a fire demon and seemed to have quite a large organization behind him. He had met him in an ordinary market in the fire elemental plane, and when he introduced himself, Zoyard had said that he was a subordinate of Prince Hroibelik. Memories quickly flashed through Grimm's mind, and he naturally recalled everything. "That's right. I didn't know a fire demon called Zoyard. What did he send you here? What are you here for?" Grimm asked in a low voice. Lord Zoyard heard that Lord Grimm had advanced to the 4th rank, and was naturally overjoyed. "Thus, he sent me here to establish a direct channel of communication with Lord Grimm." Also, he wants to meet Lord Grimm. The little succubus said, shivering. If he wants to meet, then let him speak to me personally. Grimm's eyes sharpened, and he pointed at the little succubus, forcing out the hidden energy in her body. A dark red glow appeared and quickly transformed into a Tier 2 fire-burning demon. The demon's chest was covered in sinister tattoos, and a demonic horn grew from the top of its head. A flame cloak covered the demon's back. Looking at the dense and fluctuating energy aura within his body, this was only a projection of his opponent's power, not his actual body. It had been a long time since they had last met. This former fire demon had risen from the high rank to the peak of the second rank. Looking at the intensity of the flames in its body, it looked like it would transform into the Ash Lord in a short time. The moment the fire demon appeared, the little succubus let out a soft cry and fainted. Lord Grimm, we meet again. Zoyard swept a glance at Grimm before hurriedly bowing in greeting, a rare hint of lament in his voice. 200 long years had only allowed it to take a small step in the evolution of the devil beasts. On the other hand, the fire shaman had risen from his second rank to the fourth rank, a leap of 2 whole ranks. The massive difference in strength was not something an ordinary person could measure. As the person involved, Zoyard could clearly feel the subtle yet massive change in their statuses. As for the emotions and lament it caused, it was not something an outsider could understand. We don't seem to be familiar with each other. Why did you crawl out of the abyssal realm to look for me? Grimm asked coldly. Lord Grimm is indeed a straightforward person. In that case, I won't hide anything from you. The one who wants to talk to you is not me, nor is it my lord, but a certain lord from another world. I'm sorry, but to prevent information from being leaked, I can't say that lord's name here. However, I have a message that he entrusted me to pass to you. I hope you can accept it. Where is the message? The fire demon named Zoyard smiled, and without saying a word, he exploded into fireflies that filled the sky. The little succubus, who had been unconscious all this time, shuddered and quickly climbed up from the ground. What's wrong with me? My head hurts so much. Grimm's heart skipped a beat, and he could not help but smile warmly as he beckoned to her. Come here. The little succubus trembled, not daring to move forward. Grimm did not have the time to waste with her. He stretched out his hand, and the little succubus, bound by a strange force, flew towards him. Grimm opened his hand and pressed down on the little succubus' forehead, thousands of threads of spiritual force burrowing into her head like fire snakes. In the next second, a prompt from the AI chip sounded in Grimm's mind. Beep. Discovered an unknown stream of data. After inspection, no traps have been discovered, and no harmful substances have been discovered. Requesting host instructions on whether to accept it? Accept. With Grimm's command, a strange stream of data surged into his mind, quickly turning into a historical image. Grimm watched and listened quietly. Soon, he understood the whole story. A moment later, Grimm released his right hand, and the little succubus' eyes rolled back in her head, and she fainted. What an intricate design! This little succubus was only a messenger. The information that the other party wanted to pass on was hidden in the depths of her mind, but she was not aware of it. After Grimm received the information, the strange image disappeared without a trace. The main reason why the other party had made things so complicated was because some information could not be conveyed verbally, nor could it be put into words. Once it was formed, the person behind the scenes would be able to sense it. Looking at the unconscious little succubus, Grimm pondered for a moment before gently shaking a small golden bell at his side. After a while, the graceful and calm female attendant also strolled in. Bring her away. Keep her in the tower for now. Don't restrict her movements, but don't let her leave the tower or communicate with the outside world. Yes. Although she did not understand, the female attendant clearly knew what to ask and what not to. She waved her hand to summon 2 night elf girls, picked up the little succubus, and left with a bow. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.